Welcome to episode 33 of the Coast AFL Podcast, B'n'F Blaze. This week, the trade period has begun. We're pretty much in the midst of it at the moment. We talk about most of the movements that have happened so far. Predominantly, they are picks, which isn't usually a bad thing, especially when it comes to how crazy some teams are going into with the draft. We also talk about every team's best and fairest winners and probably their top 10 as a whole. And we've got a couple of retirements to touch on as well. So let's jump straight into it. How are you doing, Mr. Sarek?
Not bad, not bad. As usual, I'm taking advantage for the AFLW. There's been a few home games in a row for Freo, so I've been enjoying that. Although, first of all, Fremantle lost to a pretty injured Carlton, which was pretty sad.
It is pretty sad.
B, I'm very happy that the scheduling for the women's has slowed down a tiny bit because, they had to go through a lot. You know, so many going from 5 games or 4 games, middle of the week games. It's just, as much as I like supporting the game, the AFL doesn't exactly make it easy on them. So I always like to give a shout out.
I understand that they're trying to give the league its own space to work with outside of interrupting the actual the AFL period. But you're trying to fit it all these most fit in before summer starts. It's not a great idea.
Yeah, no, exactly. And as I said, the condensed fixture with the increase of injuries, there's just a lot of teams that, are going as if this is like a war of attrition season and it's only 11 games and, they're not full-time athletes, so, so that was just sort of me also going to football. Also, as an update, I've had my first interaction with Fremantle's third mascot, the Quokkadocker, and oh boy, he freaks me out. I'm pretty good with animals. Not many animals freak me out. But you give it's just something about very low. It's a chunky ass mascot. And he just waddles and it's got this creepy ass grin. It's just unsettling. I could understand, if it was designed to be creepy, that would be less creepy.
Mm.
But the fact that it's meant to be one of the cheery animals, and yet it looks so untrustworthy. I don't know.
I think I'm
going to stick to high-fiving Johnny.
Unlike an actual quokka who are very, very friendly.
Yeah, they are. Maybe they just want food. But, as I said, I don't know. Something about mascots. They're either really, really cool or really, really creepy. There's no in between. That's my update for the week.
And as for mine, PAX was this weekend. PAX Australia. Myself and a group of our mutual friends, we all go together, spend the weekend together. Unfortunately, Sarek, as you all may be aware, did not make it this year. Unfortunate. So we couldn't do an IRL recording of the podcast.
Would have been nice, but just expensive from WA.
Yeah,
going over.
But it was good to see everyone, including all of my streamer Overwatch friends. It was really good to see all of them as well. Get to hang out, socialize, have plenty of drinks. It was a time. But back to normalcy. Thankfully, I have Monday, Tuesday off before going back to work Wednesday when this podcast will go live as per normal. So until then, just taking advantage of the days off that I have. Let's jump into the retirees. We're going to start with Lachie Hunter, as he announced his retirement at the end of the season.
Yeah, pretty much. I think it was in between grand finals. We just never really found a place to put him in. I think it was in between the quiz episode and the last podcast. Proper episode.
Yeah, that's right.
Lachie Hunter finishes on a very awkward 199 games. Drafted pick 49 for the Western Bulldogs, a premiership player, best and fairest winner. Blaze probably has all the actual things. I normally just look at the stats.
I've got a couple of his honours here. So he made the AFL Players Association 22 under 22 team.
Mm-hmm.
In 2016, obviously. He won the Western Bulldogs Best and Fairest in 2018, and obviously he won the Premiership in 2016 with the Bulldogs.
Yeah, and it was really his first breakout year. first game he cracked 20 games and would do that for another 5 seasons. And yeah, pretty much he was just a very solid outside piece to a Bulldogs team with a super strong inside midfielder like that 2021 team, when they sort of had all their pieces together. Like, I know functionally it wasn't as powerful as, like, some of the like your Brisbane 2000s or maybe even like your Eagles of the early 2000s.
Yeah.
You know, but in terms of player names, you're having Adam Treloar, Bontempelli, Lachie Hunter, Jack McRae, Bailey Smith, all in, relatively good form. Liberatore as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had like backup players like Mitch Wallace and or even Caleb Daniel when he rotated through the mids. So, I guess the other side of that is they never quite all gelled together. There was a bit too much versatility, and probably not enough cohesion. But Lachie Hunter was a player you could look at week in, week out. Strong running on the midfield, pretty good with his disposal. And yeah, as I said, he wasn't probably not as scoringly distributive. You know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
But still solid and compared to their inside mids. But yeah, just sort of employed that sort of attacking game style that the Dogs had. And then in 2022, sort of went out of favour of Mbeve, sort of got pushed out as, all those you know what the Bulldogs are like. But yeah, and unfortunately as well, started struggling with injuries. And then once he went to the Demons, he had one solid year there, and then sort of was half injured and half pushed out by the last of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the young age of 29, decides to retire.
Yeah, it's unfortunate one because again, he's almost at 200 games, which is a huge milestone for any player. But it's also like we've seen him be in incredible form. We know that he even as he was going into his 30s, he could have definitely still reached that same sort of peak. But it's just his body was letting him down. His Melbourne's structure as a whole was kind of all over the place, especially this season. This is it was just very unfavorable to him in the end.
Yeah. What I will say though is like I think of the Western Bulldogs side in 2016. I think a lot of it, and I think I might have mentioned this before with another player, I can't remember. But a lot of that premiership was sort of unexpected players coming together because it was really before they'd sort of, formed their cohesive core that they've had for the last, 5 or 6, 7 years for the Bulldogs. And yeah, he was part of that. Obviously you had, some specifically in the finals like Boyd, Clay Smith.
Yep.
There's another one I'm forgetting. Even Joe Hannison in the backline, sort of. I think that was his breakout year, or not too far off it. So yeah, and couple that with a few older veterans like the tail end of Bob Murphy and I'm guessing Liam Picken.
Pickens
Yeah,
be up there.
as I said. Yeah, it's sort of just part of the perfect storm that came together for the Bulldogs that year. So yeah, a very big highlight for him to put on as a badge of honour. Not, he might not have reached 200, but a premiership for most player, whether you play one game or 100 of 300 games, you always want that premiership to look back on, and especially playing throughout the whole season. So congratulations to him. It's probably all I really got to say about him.
We salute you, and we hope you have a very enjoyable retirement. All right. Next on the list is Mr. Joe Daniher, who announced his retirement only a few days after the AFL Grand Final victory.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is probably a combination of body, which is very weird because it's been very way more solid for the Lions than anyone could have predicted. Obviously started as a father-son for the Bombers. He was very unfortunate to where he's showing a lot of good signs early, especially going into 2017, where he averaged 2.8 goals a game, ended up with 65 for the year, I think. He was just short of the top three for the Coleman. I think it was up there. But yeah, that would be his career high. But what would follow was a string of 3 injured years for the Bombers. They sort of, I don't want to say gave up on him, but he definitely wanted to find a fresh start. Found a place in the Lions where they were sort of looking, Hipwood was looking more and more likely that he wasn't quite a on his own key forward, first option. So what happened was absolutely beautiful for the Lions. 4 years, I can roughly do the maths, about 75 games, which is absolutely fantastic. So that's 75 of his 204 game career. I'll say he was a round 1 pick 10 draft pick in the 2012 draft by the Bombers. Went in free agency. The Bombers did end up getting pick 9 for him. The pick that would eventually turn into Archie Perkins. So, they still got something out of that deal. But
96 games at Brisbane.
96?
96.
What did I say?
You said 75.
Ooh. Okay, my math is terrible. Yeah, no, sorry, yeah. Okay, so yeah, it's almost half this time at Brisbane, which is, quite unbelievable. But yeah, as I said, those 3 years were, unfortunately, not what Daniher could deliver. And, it was a bit awkward seeing him off. I honestly, and we'll probably talk about this considering we're probably going to be talking about father-son rule, because of its implication in this upcoming draft period. But it wasn't the best send-off for him. I thought he was a bit maligned for what he was. Obviously, his other problem was his accuracy, especially early on. He only really had the accurate year in 2017. He kicked 65 to 39, and the rest were probably closer to 50-50 than you would really want. And yeah, but as I said, very instrumental part of that 2024. And just in general, just so fun to watch. Like, he's just one of those players that tend to have, and it's not like a magic as in like everything he touched turned to gold. It's just everything he's touched turned entertaining.
Yeah.
And, part of that because he was an ungainly player. Like, he had that look about him. He didn't look that coordinated. He was, but it was one of those dangerous amounts of coordinations where he'll try to overextend and end up whiffing completely at times. But other times, he would do some amazing thing, go on some runs, take some bounces. I don't know the stat, but he would have to be the most bounces by a key forward in the modern era, probably behind Buddy Franklin. And yeah, and also pinch hitter ruckman as well.
Yes, that is very true.
So, yeah, as I said.
Overall, he did keep more goals than behinds, 395 to 288. There were only 3 seasons where he kicked more behinds than goals, and I think that was primarily due to injury. That's his debut season in 2013,
2020.
then 2018 and 2020. Again, they were injury seasons for the most part. And then obviously he played his most games this past year because of the finals. But I managed to get full seasons in for the most part across the board for his entire time up at Brisbane. And then for his honours overall, which there are actually quite a few that he pertained throughout his career. He was an AFL Rising Star nominee in 2014. He came second in Essendon's Best and Fairest in 2016. Essendon's leading goal kicker from 2014 to 2017. Won the Essendon Best and Fairest in 2017. Won AFL Mark of the Year in 2017. As well as All-Australian in 2017. And then obviously the Premiership in 2024.
Yeah. And I found the bounce stats. 64 for his entire career. Only 1 career year without a bounce. Unfortunately, that was the 2019 game where he only played 4. So, yeah.
Fair enough.
He's
yeah.
no.
certainly had a well. We did kind of talk about it when we did our grand final review. Is that like
Hmm.
Joe Daniher does is what Joe Daniher does, and him retiring at the age of 30 is this something that Joe Daniher would do?
Yeah, sort of par for the course. But, as I said, I don't think it can go understated, like how much his body was banged up. Like he was, when Brisbane Lions got him, like there was a lot of controversy about Essendon getting picked 9, because of like, oh, but like Danaher might not actually play that many games, like it's way too high because, even though he's like obviously a skilled player, it said there was a lot of question marks.
Mm.
I want to say, like, similar to Buddy when he went to Sydney, like, he was rumored to never be able to lift his arms above his head. And then he obviously goes and has a huge impact there. So, I think Brisbane will be absolutely ecstatic with his 4 years of service as a Lion. I think most Bombers fans sort of warmed up to him by the tail end of his Lions era. Obviously a lot of that's just frustration with the injuries, and partially for the club themselves with the staffing. There was a bit of rumours that Danaher was upset with the way that they treated his injuries. But, as I said, the best thing was, as I said, those 4 years for the Lions. Like, he got like an All-Australian year at the Bombers, where his dad played for, and then, to finish off his career with a very respectable run. Probably, not top 3 key forward, but definitely like one of the, someone that's going to get in most teams, no matter what. So, yeah.
Yeah, especially when he's like in form. Like his stat rulings for this season alone are like either above average or elite. So he's easily in
Yeah.
better company this season.
Like Mark's inside 50, I think I looked at it before and I think is near top. I think Hogan was better than him this year. And I think there was another and he was third. Again, this is going off stats I was looking for a while back. But yeah, also a bit of distribution for a key forward. Normally averaged about 5 for score involvements. And as I said, did like to go up the ground for a little run. As I said, pinched it in the ruck, also could swing back in defence. Especially this year, there were actually some times where he did some solid things, standing tall in the back line. So, you can't teach an old dog new trick, but you can teach a old giraffe new tricks. I sort of likened him to a baby giraffe, so it's only fair that at the end of his career, we'll give him graduation to a pure long neck, and maybe he can enjoy some long nets as he sails off into the sunset.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we do, we salute him, and we hope that he has a very enjoyable retirement outside of footy. I don't know what he's going to be doing. Like, I don't think it's unlike like some of the other players that we've spoken about. Most end up going into like a trade, or they own a business already and they just start running that full time, that sort of thing. I don't know what Joe Daniher is going to be up to.
I didn't really hear too much of the off period. I know he does a bit of community work. From what I've understood, he's a fairly upstart guy. I mean, most of Danaher's people have fairly good things to say about. I'm trying to remember. I think he might have at least been somewhat involved in the women's game as well.
Okay.
I can't be 100% sure on that, but yeah. But otherwise, as I said, I'm sure whatever it will do, hopefully he can bring that same weird spark of energy as he did to football, and life will be more entertaining because of it.
Absolutely. All right. Next on our agenda are the AFL best and fairests. So we're going to start pretty much from alphabetically, just because the list that I have is via alphabetically. So Adelaide Malcolm Blight medal. This one was actually I want to do 10 to 1 rather than 1 to 10. Granted, I've got the list
Sure.
on screen anyway. So, in 10th position for the Adelaide's Malcolm Blight medal is Lachie Scholl on 69 votes. Equal 8th is Isaac Rankin and Matt Crouch on 72 votes. Actually, I should probably mention the way the best and fairest work per every team is that every player that plays in said game gets the vote on who performed best of field, and it's always, I believe, like a 1 to 10 sort of voting system. And
It does differ for some clubs, but yeah, yeah, pretty much. That it's either all the players or the coaching staff or a mixture of both.
yeah, so that's why you'll see that numbers of votes go into the hundreds, for example. It's
Yeah,
fairly substantial. But yeah, as I was saying, equal eighth is Isaac Rankin and Matt Crouch on 72 votes. Seventh is Josh Rochelle on 79 votes. Sixth is Rory Laird at 82 votes. Equal fourth. Oh, actually, sorry. Fifth is Darcy
fifth.
Fogarty. There's a typo here. Fifth is Darcy Fogarty at 87 votes. Fourth is Max McCallany is on 89 votes. Third is Jake Saligo on 93 votes. And equal first, both winning the Malcolm Blight medal, is Ben Keys and Jordan Dawson on 107 votes.
Oh, yeah, no, I said not too much to say about this one. I think Ben Keys, especially, I'm very glad that he got to cap off his year because it was very impressive and probably
Absolutely.
the most consistent of them. I'll say Michael Annie's consistent, but unfortunately, he's just sort of player that never quite gets as many top votes. We didn't really talk about him too much in the season, but I don't think he did all that much wrong in his games. It's just
No, he was very solid.
sort of the way
Very
Adelaide
much a
play.
solid role player.
Yeah, and even with Hinge being a bit and he's the other one. Oh, Brady Smith being a bit up and down at points during the year. Max McElhenney was very consistent. Darcy Fogarty, a lot of that would be in the back half of the year. And boy, when he's playing well, does the team play a lot better. Rory Laird, down year by his standards, still a lot of contribution. Rochelle again, a few down games, but his best games was very exciting. Rankin, 72, but a lot of injury. Same with Matt Crouch. Probably would have been top 3 if they played out the season. And Lachie Scholl just got better as the year came out on the wing.
Yeah, absolutely. Big agree. And there is actually quite a bit of upside to Adelaide going into next season. So we're looking forward to seeing, obviously, we have talked about this previously, but we are looking forward to seeing what improvements that they make, especially now that they finally know what they're doing with Rankin after him being all over the ground this season, plus, injuries and reports and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Unfortunately, sort of shot himself in the own foot, but there was definitely that awkward mix of Rochelle, Rankin, and Saligo that never quite fit until the later parts of the season.
All right, next on our list is Brisbane with the Merritt Murray Medal. We'll start at 10th once more. Oscar McInerney and Cam Rayner finished equal 10th on 54 votes. Equal 7th is Harris Andrews, Jared Berry, and Joe Daniher on 56 votes. 6th is Ryan Lester, aka Froggy Lester, on 60 votes. 5th is Darcy Wilmot at 61 votes. 4th is Hugh McCluggage on 64 votes. And then a very, very tight top 3 with Josh Dunkley sitting 3rd on 71. Dane Zorko, 2nd at 72. And of course, Lachie Neale at 73 votes, winning the Merritt Murray Medal.
Yeah, as I said, very close. And, it's very interesting because we've talked a bit about Dane Zorko before. And the more the year's gone on, the more I've actually sort of appreciated his year because, it's one of those games where you look at his pure stats, especially the first half, doesn't look that impressive. But when you see the passive actions he's able to do on field and play his role, he does a lot of things that other halfbacks don't quite do quite as well. So, absolutely deserves to be near the top despite being closer to the twilight end of his career. Neil's obviously fantastic. There's not much we need to say about that. But I will say, yeah, as I said, he's turning into almost untaggable considering how strong Brisbane's midfield is because the more attention you put on him, the more players like Dunkley and McCluggage get a bit more freedom to do what they want. And yeah, obviously the other good thing about Brisbane is the mix of players they have in the back half, like Darcy Wilmot, very young, Ryan Lester, role player that just had a career out of nowhere, even above Harris Andrews,
Mm-hmm.
who, arguably an All-Australian player, to be the best player represented in the pure back line, or depending if you call him a halfback, is a bit of a floater. But yeah, Jarrett Berry, someone who's always very inconsistent, got that outside run for him. Joe Daniher, as I said, absolutely great year. Started a tiny bit slow, but again, just got better as an option, leading that offense. And then you got Oscar McInerney and Cam Rayner. Cam Rayner, very great back half the year, a bit slow to start. Oscar McInerney, probably not his best year, but he's just such a workhorse, so strong and great around the contest. I'm glad that's acknowledged. And there's a lot of players on here, that had solid contributions, like Loman, Archie, who else am I thinking of? Starcevic.
Starcevic
Yeah.
could probably pulled high, but I believe he was injured for bits of the season as well.
Yeah, so said as you'd expect in the what do you call it? Premiership year, it's very great that they had such a mix. And even, with some of the other awards, the rookie of the year going to Logan Morris, like how exciting is that if you're Brisbane? It's always a bit concerning when Joe Daniher retires, but to have such a strong, promising forward, to come up and possibly not replace him, but, as I said, Hipwood will probably take more of the contest and allow Morris to, play with him, develop, and hopefully turn into a really solid player.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there isn't really much more we have to say for Brisbane. I mean, the Premiership says it all. So let's move on to Carlton and the John Nichols Medal. Okay. So let's start at 10th. There are no equal winners on this one. It's all straight 10-1. So Matt Kennedy finishes on 110 votes. 9th is Charlie Kerner at 116. 8th is Harry Mackay at 117. 7th is Tom de Koning at 121. 6th is Blake Acres at 122. 5th is George Hewitt at 141. 4th is Jacob Wiedering at 144. 3rd is Sam Walsh at 147. 2nd is Nick Newman at 148. And with a whopping 204 votes, because I just read that Carlton do their measurements by a maximum of 16 votes per game, is Patrick Cripps, which, to no one's surprise, he did win the Brownlow medal as well, after all.
And especially when you have a 16 ranking, like he would have finished top a good percentage of those.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, he had one of, an incredible season. Like, there were a couple of games where he won them off of his own boot. He was doing
pretty much.
So much.
Inspired leadership, exactly. Not too much to say about that. We'll go down the list a bit. Nick Newman, sort of a weird player. Like, again, it's sort of a bit like Zorko, but a lot more understated in terms of league recognition.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously had a fantastic year, and most people appreciated that. But there are some stats suggesting, like, this was actually, again, like Zorko, he just does a few more of the little things each round to, make him more consistent. A great user of the ball. And, although Carlton weren't historically, through the year, a back half team, he definitely was the strongest unit in terms of that core of players, 3 players for them. Sam Walsh, as you say, like, obviously not quite as brutish as Cripps, but absolutely fantastic defensive pressure while still being a fairly great user of the ball.
Mm-hmm.
Jacob Wiedering, arguably one of the best one-on-one defenders in the competition. George Hewitt, a good mix of inside and outside run, along with Blake Acres, who is mainly on the outside. But especially in that first half of the year, they were absolutely fantastic. Tom De Koning, again, he probably could have gone a bit higher if he finished off the season, but some of his games were absolutely elite. Probably pinched a couple of Patrick Cripps' 16s. Harry Mackay, Charlie Kerner, what more can you say? They went through them a lot and they delivered a lot of score for them. You know, it's very straightforward. You kick the ball to them, they score goals. And Matthew Kennedy, like a very interesting player, considering that Carlton sort of suggested that he might find himself a new home this trade period. Obviously, that hasn't happened yet. But, you know, for his skill set, I know he's not the best shot for goal, but he's a very good attacking forward that plays midfield as well. Like, he plays two positions fairly well. They haven't quite found that slot for him. I think the problem for him is he's probably a better midfielder that spends a bit of time up forward. And obviously with Carlton stacked midfield, that hasn't quite happened for him. So yeah, he might be a late deal sort of person. Who knows? Maybe it will be a freeway trade to maybe get Dan Houston over the line. I don't think it'll go to Port, but you know, if there's another club interested and it might shuffle a few picks around, that could be it. Who knows? We'll talk about that a bit later.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, you know, in terms of like what we want to see out of Carlton in 2025 is just more of the same, but slightly better, with hopefully less injuries.
Yeah, probably less injuries. That's the thing, because, you know, as I said, all the core players, like, there's hardly a bad, you know, like I said, arguably something like Adelaide's, you know, when you get to the 10, you get players that are a bit spotty. Even in Brisbane's list, like Cam Rayner, he didn't have the most consistent year. But a lot of these players, you know, week in, week out, pretty much gave it all. It was just sort of the back end of their list, sort of let them down, but, you know, it caught up to them, I'll say.
All right, next on the agenda is Collingwood's E.W. Copeland Trophy. Their voting works by 5 members voting up to 22 votes per game, and there's no maximum number a single player can earn. So a lot of these numbers feel like a little bit skewed. But we'll go through the list as per normal. Starting at 10 is Darcy Moore at 632 votes. Equal 8th is Bobby Hill and Braden Maynard at 645. 7th is Pat Lipinski at 656. 6th is Scott Pendlebury at 682. 5th is Steele Sidebottom at 719. 4th is Jack Crisp at 740. 3rd is Josh Dacos at 741. 2nd is Darcy Cameron at 859. And first, which to no one's surprise, is Nick Dacos at 997 votes. He, again...
very disappointing didn't make 1,000.
I mean, it's a credit to him, though, and to the entire Dacos family as a whole, because now both the brothers and their dad, Peter, have won the E.W. Copeland medal trophy, whichever it is.
Yeah, E.W. Copeland. They're a typical Collingwood. They have 3. One being, I can only imagine, is the James Joyce Trophy, and the Artie Rush Trophy. So yeah, Collingwood, they like their rigmarole. They like their presentations, and they like their inflated voting. But yeah, as I said, not too much to... that's surprising on this list. Obviously, Dacos. Brownlow, fancy, I guess, this year. Darcy Cameron, probably the most consistent this year. Dacos had that period where he wasn't quite efficient. But yeah, as I said, he's off the chain. Stuff's off the chain.
Absolutely.
Josh Dacos, you know, most games providing a lot of good distribution on the wing, very attacking player. Jack Crisp is sort of the opposite of that. A bit inside, a bit more defensive, and just make sure that midfield's a bit consistent, considering they had a lot of struggles this year. Still side bottom, a few games this year, but for his age, and obviously for the next person in the suppliers tier, because Scott Pendlebury came 6th, you know, that what they're able to provide to this Collingwood side as they they're not transitioning, obviously. They just had a bit of a down year. But, as I said, it's this sort of stuff that kept them in the finals hunt, despite having a few flaws, especially in their forward line. Lipinski, again, proving why he was such a highly rated player at the Dogs. Probably not quite the talent that people may have thought it was, but it's definitely turning into a very solid distributor that can sometimes score goals in the midfield. Bobby Hill, not much to say, very explosive player. A lot of those 645 votes will be some of the explosive performances he had when he scored goals and distributed. Obviously, a better forward line might have seen him a bit more consistent this year, but I don't think I'll blame him for that. Bray Maynard and Darcy Moore, we'll put them together because they're sort of a bit the same. Like, some parts of the season were fairly disappointing for them. But overall, they still contributed, especially in the back half of the year when they started finding their foot. I think their defense was sort of the only bit of their game to fix itself. The midfield's had a bit of struggle during the year, and so did the forward line. Probably good for them to get it recognised, but they'll be hoping for a more consistent year next year as they try to push for finals.
Yeah, agreed. Speaking of finals and a team that wants to push for them is Essendon and their Crichton medal. Voting for Essendon works with just a 1 to 5 per player per round. Each player can earn up to 25 votes per round because it's 5 people voting. So let's jump into the 10 to 1. Harry Jones finished 10th on 80 votes. Jake Stringer finished 9th at 104. 8th was Mason Redman at 108. 7th is Kyle Langford at 131. 6th is Ben Mackay at 151. 5th is Jai Caldwell at 154. 4th is Andrew McGrath at 157. 3rd is Sam Durham at 184. 2nd is Nick Martin at 197. And 1st, also to no one's surprise, is Zach Merritt on 212 votes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if there's anyone, like, in terms of pushing their own team, like, you would have to put Patrick Cripps number 1, maybe Bontempelli second, but third, I think you've got to put it to Zach Merritt.
Agreed.
He was very much the heart and soul of his team, very deserving of the medal, and he got a lot more support this year than other years. And yet it still felt like a lot of the time, as we've mentioned this year, he was sort of, obviously borrowing the term from NFL, but quarterbacking, basically not designing, but controlling all the play, making sure they get some of their better entries through his foot. And yeah, I said, absolutely fantastic player. Nick Martin, I still will vouch for him. I think he was one of the best chip disposal player off half-back, especially when you consider some of the work he did up the ground. He sort of had that positionless role where he was basically playing a wing that just sort of started off half-back. But yeah, as I said, absolutely explosive player. Did burn the ball a bit. If he can fix that up, he'll be an elite player in this competition and might win a future best and fairest. Sam Durham, sort of the workhorse in the midfield, very good tackling pressure, defensively accountable while still getting his own possessions. Andy McGrath, a bit in and out some bits of the season, but in terms of distributing the ball in transition, he was very solid. Jai Caldwell, a lot of his game was tackling pressure, not quite as a tagger, but just keeping players responsible and sort of freeing up the other midfielders to do what they could do. Ben Mackay, it's a bit of a weird season for him. I think he had a very solid year. I think just, Essendon's defence structurally wasn't that great, so it didn't look quite as good as some of his other years, but still very solid overall and a great one-on-one defender. Kyle Langford, start of the year, absolutely red hot. Did quiet in the back half of the year, but he'd already done more than most forwards his height and stature would ever hope to produce, and was sort of holding down that Essendon forward line. Mason Redman, Jack Stringer, 2 players that went in and out of the season. Redman off halfback, was very solid. Occasionally beaten 1-on-1, but his distribution was pretty good. Jake Stringer, opposite in the forward line, got the ball a bit, but sometimes went very quiet. A lot of his 104 will be very skewed to the top half. He would have a few more zeros than he would like in the season, but still overall provided a lot in terms of goals and on the ground pressure for the Dons. And finally, Harrison Jones, sort of a working player for the Dons. Again, sort of probably, probably you'll see the better production from him still in a couple of years. But is finding his foot pretty well and sort of, sometimes does good work in the middle, sometimes does good work up forward. Pretty great year for him, for the young fella.
Yeah, I agree. Like they have a solid list. Definitely bits they still need to very much work on. Again, and who knows? Maybe next year will be that Essendon edge year that was meant to be this year, but clearly fell off as it normally does.
There was parts of it. I still think that this year was actually not too bad, considering I didn't think they would have the list to really do much of anything, really. But, as I said, it's just one of those things where you can't get too pessimistic. But yeah, as I said, there's a lot more that they'll be striving for in terms of consistency. And, some of the players on this list, I don't think will be their best year. But that's like more of a positive than a negative thing. It's just so we'll wait and see, as they finalize the trade period, what their list will exactly be like. But they've got a lot to build on. Just their defense, as we'll probably mention, needs a bit of tweaking, really.
Yeah, completely agreed. All right, for Fremantle, it is the Doig medal. Their voting system works 1 to 5, I believe, with head coach and 4 other coaches being all their assistant coaches, I would assume, allowing up to 5 votes per each player. So one player can earn up to 25 votes in a game. So the top 10 for Fremantle is Brandon Walker with 118 votes, finishing 10th. At 9th is Luke Jackson at 130. 8th is Alex Pearce at 144. 7th is Luke Ryan at 154. 5th is Sam Switkowski and Jordan Clark at 168. 4th is Josh Tracy at 185. 3rd is Hayden Young at 200. 2nd is Andrew Brayshaw at 231. And 1st is Caleb Sarong at 240 votes.
Yes, I'm gonna have to stall for a bit because my list only has 5 of them for some reason.
I'll send you the list.
Okay, can you send me that?
That would probably help if we had the same.
I'll go from top down. Yeah. Caleb Sarong, what more can you say? I think this year, his sort of his defensive output has surprisingly gotten a lot better. His ball winning is absolutely fantastic and allowed Brayshaw to actually take a bit more of a different role this year. The only side of his game that can sometimes do better is his kicking inside 50. But when you get so much production from it, like you just sort of take that and hopefully that will develop and it'll turn into even more of an elite player. Andrew Brayshaw, sort of the in-between for Freo. Again, a bit like Caleb Sarong, but obviously taking a bit of a step back in terms of, absolutely bullying the ball, but does a lot more other stuff around the ground, make sure transition does well. I've said numerous times of the year, Freo's transition between midfield and inside and outside midfield was absolutely fantastic. Hayden Young, another part of that, he's the finisher for them. He is absolutely class. Not much more to say. If you haven't seen him play, absolutely love him. Josh Tracy, the surprise packet of the year, really. I know Waterman's gotten a lot of love, but I think in terms of his play style, it's very rare to get a player like Josh Tracy where his distribution is so good for a tall player. And he's still got that forward line production. It's very hard to do. It's always easy to say, oh, your best player is your first, target. You put him deep in the goal square and he's going to be your best player. That for them was Josh Amos. But Josh Tracy was actually the best of those two, quite clearly. And, he provides so much more to the team by playing that role. And, great distribution. A bit the same as Kowski. He's a bit smaller, playing a bit more of the distribution role up forward due to the absence of small forward Lachie Schultz that departed last year. And Jordan Clark, absolutely fantastic off halfback. One of the biggest ball winners. Normally pretty good with it too. Involved in a lot of their play from the back line, scoring, absolutely fantastic. Luke Ryan, intercepting, absolutely fantastic. Unfortunately, his one-on-one production fell off when Alex Pearce went out, but still very solid year. Alex Pearce, again, stalwart of that defense, would have been up there if he'd played the full year. Luke Jackson, very serviceable, especially since he had to swing around a bit with Sean Darcy not having a very good season in terms of being available to play. And Brandon Walker, sort of a very underrated year off that half-back line with a lot of players missing. He was sort of on the fringe. You didn't even know if because he missed, he was omitted in the first week. He wasn't part of their starting 22 and, got to play more players and even overpass players like Chapman, who is very rated at the club. So very solid year for him.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know this team can absolutely punch their way into finals. This is about finding that more consistency, hopefully less injuries as well. And we will see.
Yeah, depth as well.
It depends on how they go in this trade period because, things are heating up.
Yeah. Oh, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a trade or two that happened while we've been recording. We'll comment on that later. But yeah, as I said, hopefully they might be able to snag a Richmond player or two.
Or maybe. Two. It's very up for debate at the moment considering West Coast movements.
Yeah.
All right, next on the list is Geelong with the Kaji Greaves medal. For voting, it is a performance out of 10 by the senior coach and assistant coaches. So I believe there is no necessary maximum amount that a player can earn. So I assume that if it's like one senior coach and 4 assistant coaches, it's a maximum of 50 votes. That would be my assumption. But let's go from 10th to 1st. And at 10th is probably a little bit surprising, but also not all that surprising at the same time because he did have a bunch of injuries this year, is Patrick Dangerfield at 65 votes. 9th is Brad Close at 66. 8th is Ollie Henry at 69 votes. That's pretty nice. 7th is Ollie Dempsey at 73 votes. 6th is Brian Myers at 95 votes. 5th is Tyson Stengel at 107. 4th is Tom Stewart at 117. 3rd is Jeremy Cameron at 118. 2nd is Zach Guthrie at 120. And 1st is Max Holmes with 164 votes.
Yeah, absolute year for him. I'm still a bit flabbergasted, but I definitely think he should have been All-Australian this year, and he definitely deserves his best and fairest this year because the amount of excitement he brings from halfback, it's probably the most exciting player in terms of run and carry from halfback. Max Holmes, by far the best player on halfback, and by execution, a player I'll talk about later, Dan Houston. Between those two players, there are some very much, you can see why some players, some teams build their play from halfback. And, as I said, Max Holmes, with that run and carry, he breaks teams. And especially getting that ball over the top. It's what destroyed Port, unfortunately, in their first final against Geelong. And, he did that to a fair few teams. So congratulations to him. Zach Guthrie, what a player he has been. He was honestly a bit of a whipping boy. He's said to be only on the list because of his brother Cam. But he's just gotten better as the years gone on. Once been able to develop, he still looks like he's 20, mind you. I think he's like mid-20s. But yeah, as I said, absolutely fantastic interceptor, good distributor as well. Jeremy Cameron, not much more to say. As the year went on, his goal kicking and distribution is absolutely elite for a player his age. And definitely, I would say, is the best key forward in the competition this year in terms of overall scoring, including score involvements.
Yeah.
Tom Stewart, 117. As I said, an interesting year. He had to work for a tag. Once he figured out, going from the midfield into halfback, he was able to do what he does every what he's able to do, intercept the ball, distribute really well. And he even, was able to provide a few clearances when Geelong was struggling in that area.
Mhm.
Tyson Stengel, again, amazingly not his best year, but a very good year. A few quiet games, but his games where he was on song. He's one of the most damaging small forwards in the competition. Grant Myers is a bit opposite. His goal kicking accuracy has been really good this year. He's one of the more reliable shots, and considering that he also sets up teams, you just know that when he gets the ball, it's probably going to result in some form of score. Ollie Dempsey, the young kid, absolute live wire. As I said, still had some up and down games, but the up games when he was going really well, absolutely fantastic. Ollie Henry, a bit of the similar boat. Up forward, he just all of their forwards are in the top 10, I think, actually, now that I look at it. So
For the most part,
that
yeah.
it just shows how good Geelong's forward line is. Because the next fight I'm going to mention is, of course, Brad Close, 66 votes. Again, probably a down year for him, but they were so prolific. That was hard not for him to feature in this list. And finishing off with Patrick Dangerfield, a lot of times he was the absolute X factor. I think he only played 10 to 15 games this season, and still snuck in there for an old timer. That is a very good effort.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, Geelong made finals, made prelims. They unfortunately ended up not making it to the grand final. Might be fortunate for some people, but we know this team has always been very strong. We know that with Hawkins' retirement and Tui's retirement, that they're still in good hands, especially with Shannon Neal stepping up massively alongside Jeremy Cameron this year, filling in Hawkins' role. And, the rest of their small forwards, like you've also got De Koning as well, floating through there. You've got, again, Myers and Henry and Dempsey and Holmes all contributing to forward attack and score involvements. They're definitely not out of the woods in terms of backing away from
in terms
finals
of
contention.
in terms of like on paper six in the forward line, they probably have the best in the comp. It's just a lot of teams made their score from forward half intercepts and involved a lot of their midfield a bit more. I would also say Brisbane is up there as well. But yeah, as I said, even Brisbane, you could argue, Hipwood had a bit of a down year. Charlie Cameron was a bit up and down. So yeah, as I said, this is probably the most complete of what you would actually fill in a forward line. Top forward six.
Yeah, I completely agree. All right, next on the list is Gold Coast with their club champion medal. Not really named after anyone yet, which is surprising.
Maybe the Swallow medal after a couple of years.
Yeah, probably. Again, voting for the Suns is their match committee just goes 1 to 5. So it's kind of self-explanatory. So we'll start at 10th. 10th is Jared Witts at 35 votes. 9th is Took Miller at 36 votes. 8th is Ben Long at 39 votes. 7th is Will Powell at 43 votes. 6th is Mac Andrew at 49 votes. 5th is Noah Anderson at 50 votes. 4th is Matt Rowell at 54 votes. 3rd is Sam Flanders at 55 votes. 2nd is Brody Hewland at 56 votes. Considering he was high contender for the Rising Star this year, that's very, very impressive for him. And then first is Sam Collins at 68 votes.
Yeah, and honestly, again, so unfortunate for Sam Collins and Wilkie. Probably had, most years would be considered for All Australian, but just sort of overshadowed by some of the other players this year. But in terms of importance to their own team, I think Sam Collins is undoubtedly the most important player, especially since their backline's so vulnerable. Not quite the same, but it sort of reminds me of like Jeremy McGovern in the Eagles, where you just wouldn't want to see a team without him because they would struggle. I know Mac Andrews was developing. Hopefully he might lift a bit defensively next year. But, as I said, he's still pretty good. But Sam Collins is just developed into a really good player and a great pickup because he used to be a Fremantle player. I think delisted from Fremantle.
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't even think he was traded. So one of the rare times where Gold Coast has made a player delisted go to them and work because obviously they've had a few go the other way. Bodie Uland, love the kid. He is, in his second year to be able to pick up a lot defensively and to look like one of the better smaller defenders in the competition is really good credit for him and pretty consistent too. Obviously, his back half was phenomenal, but he was pretty great in the first half of the season as well. Sam Flanders, again, I've mentioned about him in terms of Gold Coast, and I have said, he's still absolutely deserving of being considered a really good player, and I think that reflects this.
Yep.
55 votes. He does rack a lot of cheap disposals, but like a player like Nick Martin, like a player like Nick Newman, even, as I said, sometimes you just got to need that to be able to set up your team. And, I don't think they have the game plan to pull it off, but I think Sam Flanders, as Gold Coast develop their game plan more, I think his impact will get better and better. Matt Rowell, we talked about, very interesting year. Started off as a very defensive player, and he was just sort of let off the chain as Gold Coast finals chances were looking less and less likely. It'll be interesting to see where he, how he approaches next year. Like, we'll go back to being that defensive linchpin, whether they'll try and find another player to be, so he can continue playing just a pure competitive beast. But absolutely fantastic year. Probably underrated, I would say, considering I think this is like among his best years. But obviously just didn't quite look as pretty stat-wise as he can be. Noah Anderson, probably fifth is where I'd expect him to be. Very talented player, very good possession getter, but some of his forward entry inside 50 needs a bit of work, especially for connecting that midfield and forward line. But yeah, as I said, still great accumulator, and he should develop as years goes on. Only 23, I should add, so got a lot of upside. Mac Andrews, again, hype for a reason. Very talented in the back line. Getting better at being more solid as a one-to-one defender, but still a little way to go. As an intercept defender, there's no doubt he just reads the play really well. He's very aggressive and very confident. He'll just flourish if he gets good coaching behind him. Will Powell, obviously, be disappointed for himself to get suspended for that, needlessly for that 3 games, I think it was.
Yeah.
But otherwise had a very solid year. Sort of floating between the half back line and midfield. Very versatile, good user of the ball. Ben Long, again, not the best year for him, but considering, he was a relatively speculative pickup from St Kilda and turned into a small player, basically playing as a key forward. The production they got off him was absolutely fantastic this year. Tuke Miller, injured to buggery, and still put on some pretty good performances. And Jared Witz is a bit in the same boat. Still one of the better tap ruckmen. Normally very durable, just struggled a bit this year.
Yeah.
In terms of injury.
Big agree. And again, they're still trying to find their way to the correct path to finals. Dimmer did the best that he could in his first year, but it's definitely looking to start to restructure and re-gear this team for a finals tilt in the next couple of years.
Yeah, they got the pieces. They just need to figure out how to get them working. Because that list of 10 players is pretty solid. Definitely wouldn't be the worst list on here.
All right, next on the list is GWS and their Kevin Sheedy medal. How voting works for them, which is actually a new system for them this season. Line coaches rate their respective players under a performance scale, and then they all meet together to determine an overall rating for each player before submitting to the head coach, who allocates up to 6 votes for each player. So the 10-1 for GWS is, at 10th is Harry Himmelberg at 40 votes. Equal 8th is Toby Bedford and Harry Perryman at 41 votes. 7th is Toby Green at 45 votes. 6th is Jack Buckley at 49 votes. Fifth is Brent Daniels at 50 votes. Fourth is Connor Iden at 59 votes. Equals second is Tom Green and Lachie Whitfield at 66 votes. And first is Jesse Hogan at 67 votes.
Yeah, and as I said that Jeremy Cameron was the best score involvement sort of key forward, but the best pure, almost old school full forward has to be Jesse Hogan. Absolutely fantastic. Led contested mark, as I mentioned earlier, for the year, especially inside 50, and won the Coleman Medal. Not much more to say about that, as I said, and probably the biggest leap in production, in terms of year by year basis by any player. Because, as I said, it was always a bit speculative. Had bits and pieces last year. I think he made the switch 2 years ago. I think it was. Obviously, it didn't work out Fremantle, but absolutely good to see such a highly touted player start showing his potential at a weird time of his career. But GWS will be thankful. Second and tied. Two players similar in the way I look at them. Tom Green and Lachie Whitfield. Two absolute great ball winners. The disposal could use a bit of work at times, but there's no doubting the effort that they put in week week out. If they can I think sometimes systematically too, sometimes that's where their disposal gets a bit sloppy as well. So, they can work out structurally how to get more out of their forward movement. Midfield movement. They'll take advantage of two absolute gun players. Connor Iden, very deserving fourth. His defensive work is absolutely solid. His distribution is normally pretty good. Sometimes turns it over, but for a young player, you love to see the confidence that he has to take the game on. And, he's sometimes a part of the orange tsunami that we sometimes see from the back half from them. Brent Daniels, number 5. Absolutely fantastic year for him. Absolutely great distribution. Had a couple of absolutely phenomenal games. And Jack Buckley, again, started the year a bit slow with GWS's defence as a whole. But he was one of the better one-on-one defenders. Obviously, Sam Taylor missed a chunk of the year, but I would argue that Jack Buckley, what he was doing, he definitely deserved the mantle of the best defender at GWS this year. That being pure defensively. Toby Green pops in there. Bit of a quiet year for him, but I think it was a bit understated how much he was still able to generate in terms of goals, in terms of scoring involvements. It just wasn't as big a stat year as he would have liked, and a bit quiet considering. And then we get to Toby Bedford, Harry Perryman, which I'm pretty sure Perryman's gone now, isn't he?
We will talk about that in the trade period, but yes.
Yeah, I can't remember if he's already gone or rumoured to be. But,
no, I'm pretty sure he's gone.
Interested there. Yeah, and Toby Bedford, the tagger, absolutely great in the back half of the year. And Harry Perryman, just a utility player, off back half, sometimes off the wing. And as I said, pretty solid year for him. And Harry Himmelberg, again, another player who's gone. But pretty solid as a defender. But he might see a return back to the forward line. It's a bit, who knows? We'll see where he plays next year, but they'll be thankful for his service this year.
Absolutely. And again, it's unfortunate that they did go out in straight sets in finals. We know that this team can hit a bit more of a better peak, considering they did finish top 4. But it's just I think it's a slow build for Kingsley at the moment. He's still working through some kinks with this team.
And we can see that there's it's not a rebuild, but there's definitely a mini restructure going on as they try and work out, moving on from some players that are still useful, obviously, by their impact, but, they might have a few kids that are up and coming that they might want to invest some time into, make that transition easier as the year goes on so they have a consistent, hopeful 4 or 5 years of some pretty good football.
Yeah, especially if they want to make more use of Aaron Cadman. There's rumours that they might want to bring along Jake Stringer out of Essendon. There's definitely looking for some more help for Hogan up forward.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, next is Hawthorn and the Peter Crimmins Medal. Voting works for Hawthorn's medal is 6 coaches, confer to award players up to 12 votes per match. So pretty self-explanatory. For them, we'll start at 10th as per normal. Massimo D'Ambrosio at 101 votes. 9th is Jack Ginnivan at 107. 8th is Jack Scrimshaw at 108. 7th is former Port Adelaide player Carl Amon at 110. 6th is Connor McDonald at 113. Equal 4th. Actually, sorry. 5th is another typo. 5th is Blake Hardwick at 114 votes. 4th is James Warple at 116. 3rd is Jarman Impey at 119. 2nd is Dylan Moore at 146. And 1st is Jai Newcomb at 155 votes. This feels a little weird because you would think that Sicily would be up here, but I guess there was clearly a lot more impressiveness coming out of the midfield and the forward line this year around.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I don't think that's to say Sicily had a bad year. I think
No,
it's just
absolutely not.
how good Hawthorn's back half of the year. But a few of these players also had contributions in the first, probably, 7 games before Hawthorn started getting a few wins. Obviously Jai Newcomb would have been the best player of each. If you averaged each round, as I said, clearly the best player, most consistent, hard nut in the midfield, especially for such a young team. They got Warple, who's good, but actually, is he getting old? I don't know. It feels like he is, but I don't think it's that old. I think it's like 27, 28.
Yeah, he's like late 20s, I think.
Yeah. But you know what I mean. So, provide a bit of a tandem for him, take a bit of a load off his shoulder as they're sort of coming into their age as well in the midfield. Obviously, getting Day the whole year next year will be absolutely fantastic. But as you mentioned, Newcomb, while Day hasn't been there, has definitely taken the mantle as the most important midfielder there. Dylan Moore, I can't sing his praises highly enough. How rare is it for a player of his caliber, being essentially a small forward, running up to do some midfield efforts while still providing a lot of, crumbing small forward efforts, is really the best of both worlds sort of player. Absolutely deserved All-Australian. And super important for a Hawthorn team that didn't really have those big forward targets. They definitely wouldn't have made finals without his effort. Well deserved there. Jarman Impey sort of went a bit under the radar. I don't think we even really talked about him too much. But definitely did his role week in, week out. Would have been getting consistent, 3rd to 5th best player on ground sort of thing. And, his run and carry off halfback, where Hawthorn was so lethal, can't be understated. The Warpedo, again, pretty solid in the midfield. Good distribution. Good at getting the ball. Distribution can be a bit lacking compared to their other players. But considering they have Newcomb and Day, that's not really that much of a concern. Blake Hardwick had an awkward year, but still very good. Had to decide whether to play backline or forward line. As a backman, I think he played his best during the year, even though he showed some signs in the forward line. It's just, as I said, as they got more players back, they didn't quite need him to play that role. Still managed to have a great year regardless. Very interesting, Connor McDonald, depending if you count him as a wing player, technically the best winger for Hawthorn, even though Massimo D'Ambrosio is on the list. Whether that's just because of how unexpected his sort of contribution this year's been, but also he's not really as pure winger as well. He's a bit more involved in the forward line. As I said, front half of the field player. Got a good tank, good inside 50 distribution, along with Carl Amon, who also, sort of plays that role, either off halfback or when he jumps up to the wing a bit. Absolutely elite distribution. Love his foot. Love the fact that he's playing well at Hawthorn, because he absolutely deserved his bag after playing a near All-Australian year for Port Adelaide. Jack Scrimshaw, one of the best years for him. Again, under the radar. I think you pointed out, once you pointed out him as a possibility for All-Australian, I gave him a bit more attention. And, as I said, he was absolutely fantastic and probably one of the better finals player for Hawthorn.
Absolutely.
Only 2 games for them, but he was very impressive in both of them. Jack Ginnivan, not much to be said. Absolutely live wire, a lot more consistent than Watson, but him playing well sort of allowed Watson some of the pressure to come off his back. And even, Cal Shadir, he wasn't taking it was not pretty good mark, but you'll still bring some of the balls to ground.
Mhm.
And when you got Jack Daniher to mic it up, you get a few more goals there. And finishing up with Massimo D'Ambrosio, who we mentioned before. Pretty great player on the wing. Great meters game player, great run and carry, involved in a lot of forward efforts. And, I think we said a lot of this year that their outside movement has probably been some of the most impressive in the league. And he's a big part of that.
Yeah, massive agree. And again, this is still a very young team. Again, no one was really expecting them to make finals this year, and they did. They were very, very close to making a prelim of its own. And I get the feeling that they're going to keep punching up as 2025 starts to roll around. Again, we'll talk about this in the trade period, but they've basically about to sign on, or they've already have signed on 1, but they're about to sign on 2 very, very incredible defensive players that are really going to help solidify their backline even more. Give a lot more help to Sicily as well. It might push out Frost a little bit, but there's definitely extreme positives coming out of Hawthorn.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as I said, you might even see Hardwick play as a full forward next year. Well, not full forward, but you know what I mean. Full time in the forward line next year, maybe, if they still want to keep Frost. So there's some things they can do, and it'll depend. But definitely a lot of upside. That will be one of the fancy for the flag next year, just from hype alone. And I think they should roundabout read expectations if the off season continues going the way it is for them.
Yeah, agreed. Next on our list is Melbourne with the Keith Bluey Truscott Medal or Trophy. Voting works is 4 members of the match committee give each player a rating out of 10, so a maximum of 40 votes per player. Per round, per player. So for 10 to 1, Tom McDonald at 301 votes. At 9th is Stephen May at 316. 8th is Cade Chandler at 337. 7th is John McVie at 347. 6th is Trent Rivers at 350. 5th is Ed Langdon at 352. 4th is Cosy Pickett at 369. 3rd is Alex Neil-Bullen at 402. 2nd is Max Gawn at 405. And 1st is Jack Viney at 407.
Yeah, very interesting vote distribution here, especially considering the up and down, nature of what was Melbourne this year.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I'm surprised that Petrarca didn't make. I know it was only 10 games, I think it was this year, but
yeah, he was also
he's pretty
basically
good
their best player in those 10 games.
Yeah, exactly. So as I said, I'd have been interested to see if he was 11th or not, but either way, Jack Viney, again, a few very quiet games, but normally those games where he was quiet, the whole midfield was down, and he was by far the most important players in the games that they were winning or competitive, so they deserve to be up there. Max Gawn, I would actually argue he's the most consistent player for them, especially some of his defensive work. I think that went a bit overlooked this year. I think we had a bit of a discussion about it when talking about Australian ruckman. I thought Gawn was probably the best defensive ruckman in terms of being able to go back, and Cherry was one of the best forward ruckmans going up the field. So yeah, obviously Australian ruckman getting second in the best and fairest. Absolutely great year for him. Alex Neil-Bullen, we all know in the free agency is going to the Crows, or was it trade? I can't remember. Anyway, so he's then the best and fairest. Wouldn't have won many firsts or all the votes for many of them, but so consistent, absolutely does his job week in, week out. And, and a few times where their forward line really wasn't providing much. He was just that player that needed to do his job, to provide anything for them. And he did more than what was required. So absolutely fantastic for him. Cosy Pickett, again, a bit up and down, but geez, his best, was the only semblance of forward action for Melbourne this year. Obviously, they wouldn't want him to be the best pure forward, I guess, on this list, but is there, and that should be acknowledged still. Fifth, Ed Langdon, absolutely fantastic wing runner. Hard to fault his effort. One of the best runners in the comp in terms of cardio. Trent Rivers, sort of gone from half backline into the midfield as players started going down, whether it be Petrarca or the decline of Oliver this year. Absolutely fantastic. And yeah, they sort of needed him to be, because it couldn't just be old Viney this year. They needed someone to fill in that void, and Trent Rivers at least allowed them to be a bit more respectable in some of the games in the back half of the year. Judd McPhee, a young player coming in 7th. Really solid year from him. Some of his efforts in running, his defensive work for such a young player in, sort of the midfield, sort of the wing, can't go understated. Runs both ways, and it's only his second year playing. I can't quite remember. It was his first.
Something like that. I think it's first or second.
Yeah. Absolutely fantastic contribution by him. Next we go Caleb Chandler, 3-year player, I think, and sort of making a bit of an impact in the forward line. Obviously, not much has gone right for Melbourne this year in terms of that, but the fact that they've at least got a young player trying their hardest there is absolutely fantastic for them. Stephen May obviously didn't play all of this year, sort of like Jake Lever, very in and out on the side, but absolutely solid when he was in there. Obviously, we had a few arguments, well, not really arguments, to say that he's definitely a player that played a lot better when he had his friend in the back line. I say friend in sort of quotations.
More of a boss at some points.
I would say friendly rival, maybe. In Jake Lever. But yeah, May took out the honour of their best defender this year. And Tom McDonald, a bit of an awkward year for him, but just sort of had to play his role either up the forward line or as a backman. Sort of switched in between and did okay. But yeah, as I said, I think Melbourne would definitely probably want a bit higher quality at the tail end of their best and fairest if they want to be a force for next year.
Absolutely. Like injuries and like whole off-field issues, some on-field issues, definitely massively hampered their season. They have some incredible players, and we definitely want to see them succeed again, like they did in 22, 21. When did they win? 21?
2020, wasn't it?
No, Richmond was 2020.
Wasn't that the COVID year? Oh, okay, 2021.
It was 21 then. Okay, yeah, that's right. So we know they can get back to that, but it's just, fixing a lot of their off-field issues, because that's what's hampering a lot of their problems this season. Next is North Melbourne and their Sid Barker medal. The way voting works for this is five coaches rate each player on a 4-3-2-1 system. So maximum amount of votes per round is 20 per player. So again, we'll start from 10 to 1. 10th is Jackson Archer, I believe on his debut year, at 115 votes. 9th is Luke McDonald at 124 votes. 8th is Aidan Corr at 125. 7th is Charlie Comben at 126. 6th is Cam Zerha at 129. 5th is Tom Powell at 139. 4th is Paul Curtis at 140. 3rd is Harry Sheasel at 212. 2nd is Tristan Sherry at 229. And 1st is Luke Davies-Uniacke at 242 votes.
Yeah, absolutely. And, not surprisingly, a very big gap between the top 3 and 4 for them. A lot of their best play was in the midfield. And Luke Davies-Uniacke, again, very close to being an elite player in what would be his 4th year, I think.
I believe so.
Yeah, and as I said, a very contested hardball, very consistent during the year. Occasionally kicks a few goals, which helps his cause. And as I said, the quality of his ball winning is absolutely up there in the competition and deserves his best and fairest. Tristan Sherry, obviously, we've talked about him at length, how much we've loved him, loved his rise this year, and yeah, as I've mentioned before, probably the best ruckman that can go forward and kick goals, and very important into at least providing a bit of stability in their midfield. Harry Sheezel, not too much surprise that he features in there. Spent a bit of time in the midfield, a bit more than the halfback role he sort of played last year, but still sort of floated between them. Absolutely great in either one of them. A bit uncontested, but absolutely fantastic with ball in hand. Very quality stuff from him. Then we get the bit of a dip, but still, I reckon the next two or three players had really solid years. Paul Curtis, obviously, they didn't have too many forward entries, and as a small forward, it sort of limits your production. But Paul Curtis generally made the most of those entries inside the forward 50. And considering he's above someone like Nick Lachie, he still was able to get a few goals this year. Shows that, he was very trying this year, and a very important piece of their future plans in terms of increasing their offensive output. Tom Powell, sort of, I wouldn't say quite say under the radar player, but definitely sort of went better as the year went on. Early on, you could argue that was all just LDU, Sheezel, in the midfield, but he sort of added a bit more depth to them, and went better as the year went on. Cameron Zerha, he's sort of surprising how sort of useful he was as a mixture of a forward and that sometimes went in the midfield. I definitely think we're getting to slightly inconsistent players, but his best efforts were fairly solid throughout the year. Then we get to Charlie Comben. When he came back from injury, the defense just started looking a lot better. Like, he was probably in the top 5 in terms of in players of importance this year. So hopefully he'll get a full year next year. Aiden Core, I will say, despite having some of the worst defensive performances in like that first 5, maybe 6 weeks,
Yeah,
he definitely improved at the back end of the year to be very serviceable. Again, I think it's a bit of a reflection on North, how, someone with such a putrid start of the year ends up still getting 8th in the best and fairest. But I think in terms of personally, you got to give a lot of respect for Core for turning his game around, which could have been a very horrid season for him. So congratulations there. It's a bit the same with Luke McDonald. Probably for a veteran, not quite the output you sort of want, but still a week in, week out player. Definitely wasn't the worst of the veterans this year and finds himself 9th. And of course, Jackson Archer didn't even play the full year. I think he took a bit of a while before he actually burst into the side, but was very solid in that back line. Again, North Melbourne's defense went from an absolute joke to start to see the signs of something that could be described as competent. Still giving up a few big scores, but weren't getting 100 kicked in every week. We're starting to get control of the ball a bit more. They started to get a bit more movement from the back half, and Jackson Archer was a part of that, as with Charlie Comben. And those two lifting, I think, elevated the games of players like Cora McDonald, who you would hope the lift would have come from them. But it's at least good that they lifted with some of the spark of their younger players.
Yeah, big agree. And yeah, we just want to keep seeing them, keep building, keep trying new things, definitely putting more love into Sheezel, into Wardlaw, into Sherry, LDU, boy up for Lachie, into all of their core players, and just keep structuring solid players around them, and they will eventually find the right group that they need.
Yep.
All right, next on our list is Port Adelaide and the John Cahill Medal. Apparently there is no real set voting system, according to this website. I don't know if you know anything about how they do their voting system.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's just vibes. I don't watch it. I normally look the day after because, it's just a lot easier. I'm not one to watch the things as they go by. So I can't form you on that. But
It,
I'm pretty sure it's just a coaching staff panel
yeah, I would assume
once
so.
every game.
It seems like a 1 to 10 sort of voting
And
system between the
especially the
members.
list as it is, I definitely feel like this is more of a coaching staff list. Considering how much I know some of these players are rated internally, sort of reflects that.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. So at number 10 is Ollie Wines at 93 votes. Ninth is Miles Bergman at 103. Equals seventh is Darcy Byrne-Jones and Brandon Cirque Thatcher, both hyphenated names, at 112. Sixth is Willem Drew at 115. Fifth is Dan Houston at 117. Fourth is Connor Rosé at 118. Third is Alira Lear at 129. Second is Jason Horne-Francis at 152. And taking out first place is Zach Butters at 159 votes.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I probably, maybe I didn't rave about him as much as I could have during the year. But one thing I really appreciate about Zach Butters is how much time and space he's able to create in his own box. Obviously, one of my big criticisms for Port is they sometimes handball with only fractions of a second for the other player to actually receive and do something important with it. But Zach Butters was able to find time and space and was part of our most damaging forward movement. He's definitely the midfielder that can hold his head the most high in what was a very solid midfield group that was sort of let down by a bit of forward efficiency and the defense occasionally during certain parts of the year. Jason Horne-Francis, what an absolute gun. In terms of like a midfield forward, as a midfielder, his production was very solid. As a forward that played midfield, his production was absolutely excellent. One of the best in the competition. And yeah, deserves his second place and is just looking to be absolutely. You can see why he was the number one draft pick. Obviously, condolences for North Melbourne for losing such a talented player. But yeah, Porter absolutely thriving with him as a part of the mix. Third is Aaliyah Leah. Sort of an interesting sort of player for third. I think the coaches rate him a bit higher than most fans would have probably had him in terms of the end of the best and fairest. But still had a very solid year intercepting. A lot of the problems with Aaliyah's game went back to the coaching philosophy of Port, which was to defend high and be aggressive. But when Aaliyah was allowed to do that, he was absolutely dominant. As I said, they just got beaten by the back a bit. But yeah, especially in the back half of the year, when Port's defense was very solid, he was one of the main components of that. Connor Rosé, I've said at times he was a bit inconsistent this year, and I still stand by it. But I think it's also like one of those things where sometimes you forget how good his absolutely great games was, because there's a couple of games that I throw back to, mainly his game against the Western Bulldogs, where they absolutely towed them. He absolutely obliterated them in such a dazzling way. He's so silky. Not quite as good as distribution as Butters is, but sometimes I think that he's actually silkier and smoother than Butters himself. So, as I said, maybe a bit shaky for his first year as captain, but still a solid performance nonetheless. Dan Houston, I would argue, probably had a bit of a better season than Aaliyah and Rosie. Obviously, a bit of a disappointment to miss those last few games. But his distribution is absolutely elite off that half-back line. We'll probably miss him during next year. I'm assuming he goes. But again, whoever gets him, very quality movement of halfback. Gets involved in a lot of plays with score involvements without actually going forward all too much. And he has had that launch off the 50-meter arc, which is beautiful to watch. Willem Drew, our defensive midfielder, 115, solid week in, week out performance. Had a very good back end of the season. I think that went a bit underrated. But yeah, as I said, not much to say about him. Just a solid, normally gets like 25 to 30 possessions and normally around 5 to 10 tackles a game. Can't understate his effort. Then we get Darcy Byrne-Jones, not a forward that played as good a performance you can as basically a small forward that had not too much forward craft.
Mm-hmm.
He just finds a way, and you know, as I said, I don't think he's the prettiest player to watch. But in what was a bit of an abysmal option for small forwards this year, Darcy Byrne-Jones probably did solidly. And I think the coach just repaid that. Probably not the seventh best player of the year, but in terms of respect, I have a huge amount for it for him. Brandon Zek-Thatcher, very solid at times, a lot better 1-on-1 than I thought he was going to be. But sometimes got exposed and maybe has a bit of a tank issue. So hopefully he builds on that next year. Miles Bergman sort of played a bit awkwardly when he was floating between wing. But I think as a small defender, he was absolutely fantastic and a bit underrated in terms of pure one-on-one contest. We definitely looked more solid against the small forwards when he was in the back line.
Mm-hmm.
And finishing off, Ollie Wines. Pretty solid year for him. Again, a bit hard when they've got so many other fantastic midfielders, but he had a pretty great year. You know, I think there's definitely been worst post Brownlow Ollie Wines years. This was actually a pretty solid effort for him. It's just, you know, under the radar considering how good Port's midfield was purely stat wise.
Yeah, completely agreed. And again, like you've spoken at length this year about, you know, Port's ups and downs, what they need to work on, what they've been really good at already. Considering they made the prelim, you know, that's still an impressive effort. But a grand final is what you're truly after, especially with how long Ken Hinkley has been at the helm. And it's just I don't know what more you could really expect at this point in time until you see what they come out of after trade period and the draft.
Yeah, and it's like one of the things I sort of hinted at with some of these players, like, and even like Darcy Byrne-Jones and Thatcher, is like, I like some of the efforts of these players. It just feels at times that we're sort of stuck in between structure and we're getting exposed. And, you know, I don't want to say it's a personnel issue because, you know, we have a lot of talent on the list. You know, some clubs would be, that would absolutely trade their list for Ports. But, you know, in terms of getting the job done, you know, that's where the Hinkley philosophy is a bit suspect, but it still produces more often than not pretty good football.
Yeah, agreed. All right, next on our list is Richmond's Jack Dyer medal. The voting for the Jack Dyer medal is a 0 to 5, based on overall match performance, taking into account of offensive, defensive, and contest impacts. So again, I will go 10 to 1, and I will be the one to talk about all of my players. I'll give Sarek a break from talking about everyone.
I was going to ask you if you wanted to. I wouldn't take that off your hands.
So 10th is Dion Prestia at 24 votes. 9th is Ben Miller at 25 votes. 8th is Jaden Short at 26 votes. 7th is Ryan Mansell at 29 votes. Equal 5th is Shea Bolton and Liam Baker at 30 votes, which is very funny considering what we're going to be talking about momentarily. 4th is Nathan Broad at 33 votes. 3rd is Toby Nankervis at 36 votes. 2nd is Nick Vlauston at 38 votes. And 1st, our only player to play every single game this season, is Daniel Rioli at 40 votes. Now, the reason that Daniel... This is why we rate him so highly. Triple premiership player, became a rebounding defender, and is currently now, you know, winner of the Jack Dyer medal. That's why they're fighting so hard to keep him at Richmond and not make him go so easily to the Gold Coast Suns. Which, again, we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth when we talk about trade period. But that's why he's rated so highly. Like, it's very plain to see. And then for Nick Vlauston, Vlassie's always been consistent. I think he has one of the best hands in the AFL in terms of being able to take back marks. Again, he's a great interceptor. Him and Nathan Broad as well. I'll just throw Broad in here even though he's 4th. They're both incredible at what they do. It's just about, a lot of injuries really hampered our backline this season, as everyone is fully well aware. It affected the entire team. But they were both very, very good, especially with Brody signing on another couple of years. Very, very good. Toby Nankervis, of course, you know, big tank, always been great in the ruck. I think this season he probably needs a little bit more of a chop out. Like with the loss of Solo, didn't really have a second consistent backup. Injuries hampered the rest of our options. So that's probably something we're looking into in this offseason. Shea Bolton and Liam Baker at equal fifth is very funny, considering they both want to go back home to WA. One of them basically already confirmed. The other is still contracted, so that's a wait and see.
Funnily enough, could still be teammates.
Yeah, that's very true. Especially with the recent developments of McQualter becoming West Coast head coach and Jack Graham being confirmed to go over there now, which we'll talk a little bit more in depth. Trade period comes up. Ryan Mansell, I thought, has had a really, really great season. He was injured for a little bit, so he did fall out of the side. But when he came back, he's one of our best tacklers. He adds a lot of massive pressure. He's great at kicking goals. And he's one of the young players that we're definitely building our future around, which is very good to see. Jaden Short as well. We love him off halfback. His massive boot, great run. Again, just more consistency from him is what we want to look for. Ben Miller, I thought, has had a really, really impressive season. He stepped up when Gibcus went down. He's always been a fringe player. He was kind of designed as initially as a replacement to Grimes. But then he came in when Gibcus went down, and then when Grimes came out of the side, I can definitely step more into the Grimes role on a more permanent basis. But he's had really, really strong, impressive defensive efforts. I rate him pretty highly at this point in time, and I hope to see a lot more consistency out of him. And then, of course, Dion Prestia. When he's fit, he's easily our best midfielder by far. Second half of this year proved that, and I'm very glad that he did sign on for another year. I just hope that his hamstrings hold up.
Yeah.
Then, yeah, like everyone already knows at length how much this season was a mess for Richmond. Injuries being the main factor. Also, new head coach, new structure, new game plan. We still got a lot to work with, a lot to go through, especially with how the team is going to change going into the trade period, free agency, draft. So it's a wait and see for what my actual opinions are going to be for us going into 2025.
Yeah, sure. And obviously a lot of it hinges on the way that this trade period goes out. You always hope that they've got the balance of shuffling off players versus relying on drafting some new players coming in. It's hard to balance, but I think that, even if you take out some of these players, you've still got a bit of talent to work with. And I said the other side is, they've shown a lot of resilience this year. Hopefully they'll continue fighting for that, obviously probably won't be in contention for a spot in the 8, but just fighting for some respectability, fighting for a future that's looking a bit more optimistic, Tigerland.
Absolutely. And the impressive thing is that, as far as I'm aware, we're the only team that didn't actually delist any players, because we had all these retirements. Obviously, this trade period has helped as well in terms of balancing the salary cap. So we're able to keep a bunch of young talent that we already had. And hopefully, once our list is actually healthy, we'll be able to find out a better, more consistent scale, players we want to build around, players we want to put more game time into, and
exactly.
see where we go from there.
And especially when you have, such a good but mixed bag of fringe players at Tigerland. Obviously, we saw some that were really solid, some that were trying their best during the situations, and others that probably would have been dropped if not for the fact that there was no one to drop.
Yep.
To replace them. So they have a slew of draft picks. They'll probably use some of them. Some of them they'll trade off. But what we will see is hopefully more competition for spots. And, as that comes up, your bottom half of the list gets better. And you'll see a more rounded Richmond that's able to compete a bit more.
Absolutely. All right, next on the list is St Kilda's Trevor Barker medal. How voting for them works is 5 coaches give a score of 1 to 4, so a maximum of 20 votes per player per game. 10 to 1 is Bradley Hill at 72 votes. 9th is Mitch Owens at 84 votes. 8th is Darcy Wilson at 99 votes. 7th is Jack Higgins at 108. 6th is Jack Steele at 122. 5th is Isaiah Wanganeen Millera at 133. 4th is Rowan Marshall at 143. 3rd is Josh Battle at 161. 2nd is Jack Sinclair at 174. And 1st is Cal Wilkie at 206 votes, who has not missed a game since his St Kilda debut in round 1 2019.
Yeah, and, absolutely fantastic defender. Like, we all knew relatively early on he was going to be a solid player, but just kept on getting better week in, week out to where it is amongst the elite. I would actually put him in the elite key defenders. I just think there's like a 5 or 6 players you would put in elite category, which is probably higher than other positions, but he deserves to be in there. And yeah, as I said, is a very balanced defender, very, very solid one-on-one defender, very good at intercepts, and still is involved with a solid amount of scorer involvements, which, considering you're playing for St Kilda, is pretty impressive, because forward anything isn't the best for them. Oh, sorry.
No, you're good.
Yeah. Jack Sinclair, very important piece. It was weird. Arguably, he's had better years, but in terms of importance, he's just been shuffled a lot. And, to be able to play at the consistent quality he has been without having a permanent spot to play, it just shows the quality of the player he is. So very versatile, playing both as a halfback and a midfielder. Josh Battle, excellent defensively. It will be sad for St Kilda to see him go, but as I said, despite them languishing on the ladder, they were one of the best defensive teams in the year, and Josh Battle was part of that, along with Wilkie. Ron Marshall, very consistent ruckman this year, probably, again, maybe under the radar. I'll put him in the same tier as Darcy Cameron, where they had a pretty fantastic year of rucking. There were just a lot more prettier ruckman that sort of got all the attention.
Yeah.
But week in, week out, they were pretty fantastic. Nasiah Wanganeen Millera, we talked about some of their halfback movement being lacking for the Saints. One person that was by far the most exciting last year and this year is Millera. He'll get year better as years go on. He's the sort of player you want to build around. Jack Steele, arguably a bit down compared to some of his other years, but he's put in so much effort and is still one of the hardest midfielders at the Saints and so important to their side.
Agreed.
So while it is a down year stats for him, his effort is not to be overlooked. Jack Higgins, definitely a bit iffy at the start of the year and just was really solid as the year went on. I think as they moved on from Max King after he was ruled out for the season, I think he got involved in a lot more smarter play and he realized that he would have to get a lot more involved for them to actually win games. And hopefully they'll be able to combine bringing back Max King while also providing some of the good small forward play that they were able to generate in the latter half of that year. Darcy Wilson, one of the best young kids in the competition from this year's draft. Pretty good at winning the ball. Not too flashy yet, but very solid contributor to that Saints side. Machida Owens, someone who is a bit flashy, went a bit up and down this year. Probably not quite as big as his 2023 campaign was suggesting he was going to be, but still played an important supporting role. As again, Owens and Philippou sort of lifted for their side in the back half of that season, and Bradley Hill, for such an injured player in and out of the side, still so important to their ball movement. It's absolutely crazy that he's still a burst player for St Kilda on that wing. So yeah, as I said, it was a bit unfairly maligned, I think. I just don't think St Kilda has very, on paper, interesting transition, especially in their last 2 years under Ross Lyon. But Bradley Hill tends to make the most exciting bits of it with Millera.
Yeah, completely agreed. And again, they had very much a 50-50 season, a lot of downsides, but quite a few upsides, especially towards the end of this season. Again, yeah, losing battle is going to be hard for them considering how good their defense was. But once they get Max King back, they'll have a more solidified forward line, which has actually looked not too bad. Um, this at least towards the end of this season when they actually started to solidify. They had to rotate a couple of players around, but they made it work. And yeah, just Steele stepping up, Sinclair stepping up. Their midfield is starting to take a pretty decent shape once more, and now they just need to try and find those last little bits to really make a stronger effort going into this season.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, next on the list is Sydney with the Bob Skilton Medal. Here it is. A player can be awarded a maximum of 50 votes per game, and coaches can allocate up to 10 votes for as many or as few players as they deem appropriate. So it's a little all over the place for this one. So I'll just go by the numbers. 10th is Tom Papley with 576. 9th is Jake Lloyd at 605. 8th is James Jordan at 622. 7th is Ollie Florent at 628. 6th is James Rowbottom at 639. 5th is Nick Blakey at 648. 4th is Brodie Grundy at 750. 3rd is Chad Warner at 813. 2nd is Errol Goulden at 888. And 1st is Isaac Heaney, to no one's surprise, at 956 votes.
Yeah, exactly. And, as I said, it's so weird that Isaac Heaney, for the last 5 years, was just sort of a player. Obviously, his name brings a lot of pedigree. He had a lot of hype, but he was really languishing in that forward line as just an okay forward that sometimes went in the midfield. But as soon as he's got his mid rotations, and this is what Sydney have been crying out for years, he just looks so at home. He still damages up forward. Even in the grand final, they try to play him as a pure forward, but that didn't unfortunately work for him. But Heaney's never been one to complain. We've never seen any dramas or him wanting to leave because of, arguably some weirdness. So it's pretty good that he was able to pull off a year that he's probably wanted for a while in Swans colours, where he's just had an absolutely fantastic one. And, arguably the best midfielder not the best midfielder in the comp. Unfortunately, it's pretty easy to say that Cripps or Bontempelli was a bit above him.
Yeah, I agree.
But in terms of like an elite, one of the best years you'll see sort of performance, I think just 2024 was a bit of a treat for that. Errol Goulden, very weird at the start of the year. He played a very different role, but they sort of let him off the chain at the back half of the year, which is very interesting as his stats went off. Sydney were a bit up and down. I don't think it was ever his fault. But, as I said, it just showed the quality of Errol Goulden to play that sort of first half of the year as a very defensively minded runner on the wing. And then, still be able to just switch into pure aggression mode. Sometimes be a part of that inside midfield. Sometimes just burst off and break lines, as we know he can do, and get involved into a lot of scoring. Chad Warner, not much to say there. He just got even better than last year. A very attacking midfielder, involved in a lot of scoring chains and even off his own boot score. Absolutely important, invaluable part to their scoring structure. Then we got Brodie Grundy, who I surprised, he had a phenomenal first half of the year. Bit surprised to see him at 4th, but very important part of that ruck work. You can definitely see how he slotted into Sydney. I definitely think that some of the improvement of Warner and Heaney this year was part of his tap work, so he definitely should be acknowledged. Nick Blakey, absolutely a great year. His run and carry off the back line was absolutely phenomenal. Defensively, one-on-one, I still criticise him a bit at points this year, but I don't think that's necessarily a role he has to do. It's just Sydney was sort of caught out because they didn't have the best one-on-one defence. But, his effort can't be overstated. James Rowbottom, one of the best defensive midfielders in the comp, missed a chunk of time. And then sort of went into, he went from averaging near 10 tackles a game, low possessions, to really being an off-the-chain sort of midfielder, racking up possessions, being a bit looser on defense, but still applying pressure.
Yeah.
So a very mixed year for him, but still overall very fantastic. Ollie Florent went under the radar, very good on the wing, just sort of overshadowed by Goulden. Very fast player, still involved in a lot of attacking chains. Always sort of seen as the second option, but still great year. James Jordan, fancied for being an in the guts, possession getting midfielder, turned into one of the better taggers in the competition. Whether that's playing, as like a half forward or purely in the guts, he was still able to produce while mitigating the influence of his opposition player. Jake Lloyd, pretty not pedestrian year for him, but pretty straightforward. Just chips off halfback, very involved in their movement, while still being solidly defensively accountable. And rounding it off, being the only Sydney forward line player to be on this list, despite having the best offense in the comp, Tom Papley. Arguably didn't even have his best year by his standard, but still very involved in various parts of the year. As I said, it's just, more just interesting that, he was probably only just represented himself despite being, part of, again, that high scoring offense in league football. So, yeah, just said a lot about Sydney. But yeah, as I said, the fact that Isaac Heaney was nearly double his score just goes to show how good a year he had, and how a lot of that production was done by the top 3 players in that list.
Yeah, completely agree. All right, next on the list is West Coast with the John Woosha-Worsfold medal. Obviously, John Worsfold, former Eagles player, went to Essendon to be their head coach, has now actually come back to West Coast under, I believe it's an advisory role at the moment. But the way their voting works is a 0-3 after each match by 5 people on their match committee. So it's a maximum of 15 votes per game. So their top 10 is, at 10th, Tim Kelly at 112 votes. 9th is Harley Reid, which is pretty impressive considering it's a first-year performance, at 114. 8th is Tom Cole at 117. 7th is Tom Barrass at 122. 6th is Jamie Cripps at 127. 5 is Brady Hoff at 136. 4th is Liam Duggan at 141. 3rd is Jake Waterman at 155. 2nd is Elliot Yeo at 177. And 1st, and makes a lot of sense, he became an All-Australian as well, is Jeremy McGovern at 184 votes.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as you've probably heard, I have honestly one of the most impressive seasons in terms of context. I think Jeremy McGovern, considering how much ball was coming in that back line, he was able to rack up some insane possessions, and just do what not a lot of backmen that have to take a key player do. And, he was basically playing an intercepting defender's role while still being fairly defensively accountable. There was a few occasions where their man got the better of them, but as I said, West Coast defense allows those opportunities just through repeated entries. Elliot Yeo, just that consistent barometer for West Coast, getting better as the years go on. And, as I said, so important as, the veteran for the club that just puts in that effort week in, week out. I guess McGovern is also the veteran. It's so weird with the way that we talk about the Eagles, how we criticize some of their holding on to the veterans, and yet some of their veterans are still putting in solid efforts.
Well, they're veterans, but they're also not, ready to retire veterans.
Yeah, I know. It's just, as I said, weird sort of place their list is at. Jake Waterman, most people's comeback player of the year. Oh, not comeback, but most improved player, sorry. His turnaround in a forward line that wasn't really getting that much in terms of quality ball use into their forward 50. He was able to be the linchpin forward, seemingly taking marks. Seemingly at times he was one of the best contested marks of the year. That will still go to Jesse Hogan.
Yep.
But he's, absolutely fantastic and very reliable goal scorer. Liam Duggan just gets the job done. Distribution, one of the better in the team, especially off that half back line, which was a bit prone to turning the ball over. He was one of the more reliable players there. Freddie Hoff, I can't sing his praises enough. Not little I rated him, but how much I thought he was a defensive liability coming into the year versus what he was able to produce this year for a youngster. Absolute pat on the back. Definitely should be one of the more impressive performances in this year, even if it wasn't, he's not the best defender in the competition. Jamie Cripps, what can you say? The man's reliable, scoring goals in a pretty depleted forward line. Even I would say underperforming forward line. Let's put it that way. Tom Barras, what can be said? Very stalwart, him locking down so hard allows Jeremy McGovern to feel free to play the confident game that he plays. I'll be interested to see if he's able to do it, or McGovern's able to do it without Barras. But either way, we'll see how they look without him. Tom Cole, again, a player I sort of not put on notice, but, definitely didn't really... He was on the precipice of being someone to move on from, and ended up being a solid role player for most of the year. So props to him for keeping his career alive. Harley Reid, not much to talk about. One of the most hyped kids in the game. Showed a lot great offensively, and still racked the ball up enough to where you can imagine that his game only needs minor bits of improvement to be an elite player in the competition.
Mm-hmm.
And Tim Kelly, again, probably a bit up and down, but normally in and around one of at least the best 5 players for West Coast in most games.
Agreed. And yeah, it's like with their appointment of a new coach, they've already started to recruit some new players through the trade period and free agency. They're definitely looking to try and start structuring the team again to where they can be at least the middle of the pack in the next 2 years, ideally, and then hopefully push more into how they used to be and as finals contenders in probably the next 3 to 5 years, I would assume.
Yeah, exactly.
And with Andrew McQualter at the helm, I have faith in them because he did a lot of work for Richmond, and I believe in the way that he goes about things.
Yeah, as I said, I think as the sort of coach that, considering where West Coast were at, they were looking to maybe just... They weren't even sure that they were going to get a coach before they started the list structure things, before the draft period, before the trade period. So to be able to lock a fairly reasonable candidate for coaching and to still have shades of a pretty good team. Like, there's pieces to put together at West Coast. It's just, as I said, that midfield needs a lot of fixing up. So hopefully they'll be able to figure something out, to get their, A, their ball use off the back half a lot better, and B, not concede so many inside 50s from their efforts up the ground.
Yeah, completely agreed. All right, next is the Western Bulldogs and the Charles Sutton Medal. The way their voting works is 5 people do votes 0 to 5, so a max of 25 votes per player per round. So we will start 10 to 1 as per normal. Taylor DeRay finishes with 152 votes at 10th. 9th is Bailey Williams at 161. 8th is Rory Lobb at 163. 7th is Lachie Bramble at 168. 6th is Tom Liberatore at 170. 5th is Ed Richards at 188. 4th is Liam Jones at 203. Equal second is Adam Trelaw and Bailey Dale at 245. And to no one's surprise, equal first is Marcus equal first. He is first. Marcus Bontempelli at 314 votes.
Yeah, and honestly, in terms of a midfielder that's able to stand out from other midfields, do the things that other midfielders aren't quite able to do, I think that is up there on the best. I think is one of the best all-round midfielders in the comp, which is insane when I still consider him to be an attacking midfielder. He's definitely in that category, but he still does so much. On the other side of the ball, that's it. no, I don't really need to go too long about Bontempelli.
Mhm.
Adam Treloar, went a bit under the radar, but very involved this year. Got a lot of goals, got a lot of score involvements, and was involved in a lot of good transition passages of play, and a bit unlucky not to make All-Australian, as is Bailey Dale. He's one of the best quality users of that half-back line, which was very iffy at parts of the year, but you could always rely on Bailey to make the right choice most of the time. Liam Jones, very hard-working defender. Considering his brother Rory Lobb, in terms of forwards to go in the back line, sort of just made a tandem attack of making it very hard for the Tolls to be able to set up their game. Probably missing that intercept defender to capitalize off some of his work, but still a very solid year from him. Ed Richards, I think one of the most underrated players in the comp. When he came back from a few games missing, the Bulldogs' attack looked a lot better. Their movement from half back line with Ed Richards on the wing was fantastic. He was able to provide some midfield work. Absolutely star player in my mind. Talking about Sons of a Gun, Tom Liberatore, absolutely beastly in the middle. Not much to say, really. It's a year that you would sort of expect from Liberatore. Again, just sort of a player overshadowed by the ridiculous amount of quality around him. Seventh is Lachie Bramble, which I'm a bit surprised. I don't overly rate Bramble as a player, but I can say that he was used in a lot of the Bulldogs' back half movement. And, if he was performing the way that Bevo wanted him to play, I think it's fair enough him getting seventh in the best and fairest. It's just, as I said, there's a few players that I might put a bit ahead, but, that is what it is. Rory Lobb, who would have thought he was in there at eighth, considering that by round six, most people would think he would spend all the rest of the year in the VFL. Not to be. He made a TikTok, redeemed his career. In hindsight, one of the best TikToks of the year. We can all agree, can't we, Blazy?
Yeah, sure. Let's just say yes.
Yeah, no, a bit tongue in cheek there, but absolute credit for the turnaround he was able to do. Then we got Bailey Williams again. Sort of, not quite as good as Bailey Dale, but still very reliable in that halfback line, and polishing it off. Taylor DeRay. Again, for a player that I thought was well washed and past it, his defensive leap from last year to this year was night and day, and sort of glad that he might see a respectable end to his career when I thought he was just going to sort of fade out the AFL.
Yeah, absolutely. Overall, the Doggies still made finals. They obviously went out straight away for the Hawks, which not many people were really surprised about. Hawks again were on fire. They were having that miracle run still. In terms of what we want out of the Doggies for going into next season, it's just probably a bit more structure up forward.
With their forward line, the fact that not one of them made a top 10, or the only ones who didn't play forward.
Yeah. Which
Yeah.
kind of says a lot about how badly they needed the players in the back line. But that's just more love to their forward line, more restructure, probably a little bit of restructuring. Injuries definitely didn't help for them this season. But that we know that they can be very, very strong contenders. It's just about growing that and putting more game time into the younger forwards.
Yeah, I definitely do want to see them push a bit further into the final series over the next 2 years, because I definitely think with the amount of talent on their list, and I know talent always comes with deficit in other areas, it's a salary cap league. You can't be leagues ahead of other teams in terms of list talent. But they definitely should be getting a bit more out of the players that they have, and they can only seem to capture that in small bursts. So hopefully, maybe whether that's through the draft picks, or what they, reshuffling their structure with who they're trading out in the trade period, they might be able to find a bit more consistency. But yeah, I think Bulldogs probably wanted a tiny bit more out of this year.
Yeah, I agree. All right, now that the best and fairest are all over and done with, it's time to move on to the free agency and trade period talks. as of recording this, there are still 2 days left to the trade period, being Tuesday the 15th and Wednesday the 16th. Clearly, from what we've seen so far, none of the massive trades have happened yet. The ones that the media are always talking about. But no, your Shea Bolton, Julian Bakers, Bailey Smith, Clayton Oliver's still tossed around in there. Barras still hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
But we're gonna start from the beginning, and just kind of quickly just go through it all. So October 4th is when free agency started, and that's when Elliot Himmelberg has announced that he would be moving to the Adelaide Crows from the Gold Coast Suns. The Crows received no compensation pick for it. There was speculation that he was going to go to GWS to be with his brother, but no, they went to Adelaide instead.
Yeah, and as we're talking about, the Gold Coast Suns probably could get a lot more value out of their key forwards. So Elliot Himmelberg in the mix might be an option, but he also could play back as well. I think they're more sound in the back line, so I'm imagining this is to move him back in the forward line, but who knows, really.
Sorry, yeah, I did actually have it the wrong way around. He's going to the Gold Coast Suns from Adelaide. I said it the other way around.
Oh, okay, yeah. Sorry, I corrected it in my head, but
you did right. Yes. All right. Next on the list, Josh Battle goes to Hawthorn. This is one that was talked about pretty much most of the season long. Same with Tom Barras, which they're still working out. St Kilda received a round 1 compensation pick for some God knows why reason, which is currently pick 8. But yeah, this move solidifies Hawthorn's backline. It gives more support to Sicily and Hardwick down there, although Hardwick might end up moving forward if they get Barras as well. Same with Frost. That might move Frost around a little bit in their backline. But for the most part, this is 100% a move that they needed to make.
Yeah, exactly. And, it'll be insane. Like, I can't see how this wouldn't be one of the best defenses in the competition in terms of overall balance. St Kilda might be better as a lockdown defense, but they have struggles moving the ball. But Josh Battle, as I said, is a great one-on-one defender. He's got okay movement with the ball. So yeah, as I said, it's going to be insane where players like Shangov Giath, who didn't overly play much last year, he might be struggling to make his way back into the Hawthorn side. So yeah, definitely a place where they're stacked.
Absolutely. Next on the list, a player that we did actually talk about briefly just before is Harry Perryman, who has now moved to Collingwood from GWS. GWS received a round 1 compensation pick in return, currently being pick 16 in this year's draft. I don't know too much about this move, I'll be honest. I would assume they just need some more support in a key area, which is clearly obvious.
Yeah, as I said, he's sort of I guess is like a half backman that sometimes pushes up a bit. He's honestly not too dissimilar to Isaac Cumming.
Oh, yeah.
And I think early on he might have played as a forward, but I don't think it's going there to fix Collingwood's forward line. I think it's more back
defensive
option.
Okay.
As depth, especially with Josh Noble probably going.
John Noble.
Yeah, John Noble.
And considering Jeremy Howe is probably, and side bottom are probably also pushing retirement age now.
Games, yeah, exactly. They'll need to be rested at some point, so they'd have that depth there. You would expect that he went there to play every game next season if it's good enough. But yeah, that he's definitely in the mix. And the GWS got a pretty solid compensation. The compensation picks have been very generous this year. They get pick 16, which I guess is okay. Like, it's weird because like draft picks, theoretically, like pick 16, arguably Harry Perryman's more valuable than pick 16, but it's more just the consistency and weighting it to what you would expect in a trade. It just doesn't pass up to sniff when, free agency, you sort of want to reward clubs for being able to be good enough to sign players, but still not, shame teams that, might have more go home factors like a Gold Coast, But yeah, I think most people can agree they've probably got the balance a bit off here. But yeah, in terms of all the in the year in the vacuum, pick 16 is probably fair enough, I guess.
Yeah,
Like
no,
compared to other things this year, it's just okay.
it probably does actually work out well. All right, next on the list, Tom Campbell makes his move to Melbourne from St Kilda. This is Tom Campbell's fourth club. I believe I did look at this late last week, early last
I want
week.
to
I can't
say
remember,
Hawthorn,
but
Sydney,
it's
St Kilda, Melbourne.
yes. I knew it was fourth. I just couldn't remember what other clubs. But yes, he has been recruited as a backup to Gawn. Now that Gawn doesn't necessarily have a solid backup at the moment. As we saw when Gawn went out with injury briefly, Melbourne really struggled with their ruck work and their midfield pressure. So
Yeah,
having
Harrison Petty
yeah,
forced to play ruck.
Petty wasn't
Honourable,
the
but not great.
ideal option. So having an actual dedicated ruckman who's willing to just play games when needed is definitely the better option than having to make an interesting substitution.
Actually, now I think about it, I think one of the clubs with Bulldogs, not Hawthorn. But again, that's just off the top of my head. Someone can correct that.
I believe it is Bulldogs. So I think Sue was talking about this when we first read about it last week. But yeah,
yeah, it was when they were finding Tim English obviously overtook that department.
That's correct. But yeah, so there's not really much more to say. It's just a backup for Max Gawn. Hopefully he's very serviceable to what they need. And yeah.
Yep. Okay, so we go to the Blues, who receive Nick Haynes as a unrestricted free agent. Honestly, a bit up and down for GWS last year. Came into the final series a bit underdone. I think he wasn't as great one-on-one defensively, but more often than not, pretty serviceable down back. It'll just be interesting to see if he makes the best 22 or whether they're just having him for depth. Because I think he's got a bit to give in the competition. I rate him solidly enough. But yeah, as I said, it's just whether they fit him into I'd say reasonable backline. But yeah, they'll be wanting a bit more depth at the same time. And some of the movement from the backline was a bit unders, so maybe as Nick Haynes can provide a bit of a different look for an already pretty solid team.
Agreed. All right, next on the list is Isaac Cumming, who moves from GWS to the Adelaide Crows. For some reason, GWS get another round one compensation pick, which is currently pick 21. To be fair, he is rated fairly highly.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like, honestly, I'd probably rate him more than Perryman, and yet Perryman goes for a different higher compensation, but I mean, it doesn't. I don't know.
They're the ones that make the rules
at this point. Exactly. But in terms of Isaac Cumming and what to expect, he's a very solid halfbacker that sort of made a bit of a transition into the wing. And I think in terms of what, you'd expect him to sort of take Brodie Smith's role in the side as he gets phased out of Adelaide's long-term game plan. And it should provide a bit more consistency in ball movement. Yeah, as I said, I can see the fit for the Crows pretty well. I think he probably fits better at the Crows than he would have at Port Adelaide. So I'm sort of actually glad that they secured his talents because I think he'll be quite handy there.
Yep, I completely agree. Next on our list is Alex Neil-Bullen, who obviously, as we spoke just before, was top 3 in Melbourne's best and fairest, has now returned home to Adelaide and has been recruited by the Adelaide Crows. Melbourne received a second round pick, which is currently pick 28. And yeah, I think this is actually, I think they should have been given a first round pick, considering how highly he is actually rated. But I guess they could take what they could get at this point in time.
Yeah, I think second round's pretty fair. I mean, he's 28 years old. He'll have 4 years, and generally, I know it's a bit weird because first round picks don't actually end up having 4 solid years. Like most of the time, they're like battling to get to 100 games. That's just the way the AFL is. But at the same time, round two for like that sort of player is on par for what you would expect, especially who requested to go. Arguably, you could argue that this is a goodwill trade, as we'll be discussing. Goodwill trades being more moving a player that's probably going to go anyway in the not too distant future. Just to improve the culture of your club, get good relationship managers, and just not have too much bad blood between, not have a reputation of being a prickly GM, which some clubs might have after this trade period. And it should be noted, this is the first trade of the trade period, so we're finished with all the free agency movements.
Yes, that is correct.
But yeah, Alex Neil-Bullen, consistency in the forward line was an issue, and they've got one of the most hardworking and consistent half forwards in the competition. Yeah, no doubt that he'll be an absolutely great pickup for an Adelaide side wanting to be back in finals contention after a bit of a dip this year.
Absolutely. And as it's shown, Melbourne always has rated him highly. Outside of Melbourne, people have always rated him highly. He's always been very consistent, and agreed, he will definitely provide, I think, exactly what Adelaide need, at least for the next couple of years until, eventual retirement.
Yeah.
Right,
as
next,
said, he's got a good tank. He can definitely be like a 6-year player, more in this league.
Oh, for sure. Especially as players' bodies continue to improve despite the longer seasons not helping with injuries. He's definitely someone who could go at least another 5 years minimum.
Yeah.
All right, next on our list is something that people weren't actually initially expecting. But Jack Darling has moved to North Melbourne, leaving the West Coast Eagles since he started at the West Coast Eagles, didn't he?
Yes.
Officially no longer becoming a one-club player, becoming now a two-club player. I believe a part of it, I think he just wanted to move back to Melbourne. I think he's from Melbourne initially. I could be making that up. I can't remember, to be honest. But it's also it makes a lot of sense that North would target someone like Darling because he's a strong veteran presence, a lot of great leadership skills, and is definitely someone who can help with their culture and help build their team for at least the next 1 to 2 years. Similar to the Luke Hodge going to Brisbane, Sam Mitchell going to West Coast, those sorts of Jordan Lewis going to Melbourne, those sorts of trades in the end of Hawthorn's dynasty. And in return,
I'll say. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
In return, West Coast receive a 4th round pick, currently pick 67, which I think is fair enough. He's again retirement period age. You're not going to get too much more out of him except for his leadership skills and veteran presence. So I think that's fair enough.
Yeah. I'll say he was a Perth initially, played for West Perth and under 16s in the for WA. This is purely Jack Darling saying, I think I've got another couple of years of at least serviceable football. I also think he left a gin company to be here. I think I've had some of his gin.
Fair enough.
Which was fairly solid. I think it was him and someone, maybe LaCroix or something weird like that. But
LaCroix.
Anyway, as I said, I think this is just something that North Melbourne is worth rolling the dice for. We sort of saw a similar thing with Levi Casbolt going to the Gold Coast.
Yep.
Where a slightly maligned player that, structurally still has something to offer. An Eagles fan will tell you, if Darling doesn't put in the work, he can be a bit of an invisible player. But this season, his output was actually sort of the North would be happy with his output. Still a top 3 goal kicker for West Coast this year.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right.
they just need him to be a present, take a bit off Lachie's shoulders, at least bring the ball down for players like Ford and Curtis. And as I said, just needs to do a little bit, and it will be probably worth the pick 67 that they gave up for him.
Agreed. All right, next on our list is Jack Graham, who goes to the West Coast Eagles with the appointment of Andrew McQualter as their head coach. Bridge and Minnie have a great relationship, so that's why this was slightly bound to happen. Initially, thoughts were that Graham was going to go to Port Adelaide, being that he's from Adelaide, and a couple of years ago he did tour their facilities. The other rumor was that he was also going to go to Freo because of the whole idea of him being very close mates with Liam Baker as well. Either way, from what it looks like, they're both going to end up in WA regardless. But in return, Richmond received a round 2 compensation pick, currently pick 42, which I think is fine. If he had gone maybe a couple of years ago, I definitely think he would have been worth round 1 pick. Just because, granted, he's still in the prime age of an AFL career where like he could still go another level compared to like probably on the same par as what they were or what he was during the premiership years. But injury, specifically his shoulders, haven't helped him out all that well. So I think pick 42 is pretty solid rating for him. And yeah, I hope that he's able to thrive in a new environment under a new team.
Yeah, and you really hope so, because obviously the biggest question mark, considering his shoulders, is that the Eagles have probably been one of the worst injury management team. They've obviously changed their medical staff since, the debacle of what has been the last 3 years. But we've seen players like Tyler Brockman struggle this year. Players like Harry Edwards never really have a go at it due to injury. And yeah, as I said, so hopefully that's all past them. They can turn over a new leaf and get a bit of depth in sort of the midfield, midfield situation that they've got. And yeah, as I said, round 2 in a vacuum, it's probably unders for this year, really. But I mean, I don't really know the difference between Jack Graham and Harry Perryman in terms of production, but the random math calculator for the AFL decides one's a first rounder and one's a late second. So, yeah, I guess.
I don't get it, but whatever. We don't make the rules.
Yeah.
All right. Next on the list is our first pick trade. So Richmond received pick 20 from the Brisbane Lions. Brisbane received 2 second-round picks, which are currently pick 32 and 42, and 2 third-round picks, which is currently pick 43 and 45. So the pick that Richmond received for Jack Graham went straight to Brisbane. Brisbane are looking to recruit players out of the Brisbane Academy and a father-son pick, so they need the extra points because it's a point system that kind of ties with the picks in terms of being able to trade up in a sense, especially for father-son specifically. Again, this was talked about massively when the Dacos boys came into the draft. And this one is specifically for Ashcroft's brother, Levi Ashcroft, I believe his name is.
Yeah.
Who is definitely going to go to Brisbane. As much as it would be cool to have him at Richmond because he's an incredible player already, he's going to thrive better with his brother. Like, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think they've got another one. I forget its name.
I don't know if it's the father's son, but I think he's from the Brisbane Academy.
No, it's not. I think it's Academy.
Yeah.
But it's another one that's essentially a top round pick. So obviously, again, much to the talking point, Brisbane will get essentially 2 first rounders, both highly valued, winning the premiership. It's a system. It's broken. We all know that, but they've got to deal with it this year because, I mean, I can't blame for Brisbane for approaching this trade period the way they have. And just as the luck with the draft, Richmond just has what they needed, so they get to go up a bit in the draft. It's probably unders for them, but, with the amount of picks that Richmond are involved with, they're definitely getting rid of surplus stuff. Because if they did draft of what they would essentially be getting with all the trade periods, they just wouldn't be able to keep all of them on the list anyway.
Yeah, exactly right.
So yeah, essentially it suits Richmond a lot. They will be lucky in a sense that it's a bit of randomness that got them the exact picks that Brisbane needed. But, as I said, it's a trade that really benefits both teams at least. It's just more sort of the jank of what Brisbane will get, considering.
Yeah, pretty much it. And speaking of Brisbane, they did a second pick trade with Carlton that same day. So Brisbane received a second round pick, which is currently pick 34, and a fourth round pick, currently pick 66. And Carlton received pick 73 and a future second round pick, which is currently tied to Brisbane for the 2025 draft. Again, this is all exactly what we were just talking about. It's for Levi Ashcroft and the academy player that they're looking at. So that's nothing really more to say in that regard. Next on the list is actually another pick trade, but it's with Carlton and Hawthorn in this specific case. Carlton received pick 14 from Hawthorn. Hawthorn then received a future first round pick tied to Carlton and a future second round pick also tied to Carlton for the 2025 draft. So clearly Hawthorn aren't too worried about this year's draft. They believe that they clearly have a solid team already that they just need to keep structuring around. The theory is
obviously
that this was all going towards Barras, but with the trade to Carlton, that's thrown that all kind of up in the air.
Yeah, exactly. 14 was the pick that they thought was going to be the one to lure Barras. West Coast said no, so Hawthorn was like, yeah, we'll just trade it away then. And they have.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, no, was it that, or did Hawthorn say, well, no, we're not going to give pick 14? And then they traded it away to say, oh, we don't even have it now. I don't know. It was one of those.
It was one or the other. One or the other.
I don't know. I mean, look, the GMs are sort of like children in playgrounds, really. Just trading juice boxes for holographic Charizards. It's all a bit of, pomp and circumstances, but it is funny. But in terms of this, Carlton probably do want a bit more quality this year. Whereas next year, I think they'll be looking to hopefully capitalize on what was a bit under. So I think they value that they have faith that they will get a near top 4 spot next year.
Yeah, agreed. All right, and as for the trades that have happened today, Monday the 14th, Melbourne and the Adelaide Crows swap picks. Melbourne received a third round pick, which is currently pick 46. And the Adelaide Crows received a future third round selection, which is currently tied to Melbourne for next year's draft. I don't think it's part of anyone.
This was just to set up the next trade, really. Because Melbourne were needing something to do a trade with Essendon, which was this third round pick. And Adelaide just, I guess, sort of wanted to have a future third. They guess they're banking on Melbourne not being as great next year. Sort of a bit weird, but I would have thought that on paper they're losing out on this, but it's not really that. It's a bit negligible.
Yeah, it's kind of like a here nor there kind of situation right now.
Yeah. Plus, again, it might do with the list space. Obviously, they might not have the space with the picks that they've got for Himmelberg, and so maybe it's just to do literally with list management.
Possibly. So yeah, as we just mentioned, that pick that Melbourne just received pretty much went to Essendon. So Melbourne received a first round pick, which is currently pick 9, and a future third round pick from Essendon, whilst Essendon received 2 second round picks, which is currently 28 and 40, 2 third round picks, which is currently 46 and 54, a fourth round pick, which is currently pick 65, and a future first round pick, which is tied to Melbourne. So Essendon are clearly looking at either trading for someone specifically, Himmelberg being the theory, or they're looking to kind of go a little bit hard in this draft as well. Maybe trying to find some more diamonds in the rough sort of players, maybe some players that they can cultivate a bit more.
This is also to pick up one of the players. I forgot who it is, but they're bidding for someone. Isaac Keiko. According to this, he looks like Dalhouse, really early Dalhouse.
Yeah, so I see it.
Hopefully, he's as solid as early Dalhouse. But yeah, they got all that and more. I said I didn't really get invested, but I've just let Essendon fans tell me that essentially they've got all the picks that they need to get their players, plus a bit extra. So we might actually see some further pick of Essendon being involved in the draft. Either that, or they're just looking to stock up for a bit more depth, depending on how they want to go about it.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's all kind of up in the air as to what everyone is kind of doing this draft. Some teams seem to not really care at all about what's going on. Obviously,
Yeah.
other teams are trying to rebuild. Richmond, obviously. So it's all, and then obviously there are still a bunch of trades that actually need to happen or want to happen. Baker and
Yeah.
Bolton, Barras, bunch of other players. We did already kind of talk about it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And we
so
won't go into too much because, yeah, by the time this comes out, it will all be known. But yeah, it's definitely one of those things where hopefully some of the actual player movements stuff will happen because it feels like a lot of this trick play, and especially the way that the draft is set out now, you sort of have to manage your picks before you can manage your players because a lot of clubs are really dependent on getting that checklist off. Because, like, these draft picks, they're made before the draft. Like, they're not dependent on anything. If they have what they need to bid, they're probably going to get it.
yeah, exactly right.
So essentially, a lot of teams are locked in what they want to trade because they're, again, trying to get that checklist. Once that happens, teams have a bit more freedom. So that's why the next 2 days we should be seeing a few more players crossing the borders or in state, I guess, just down the park. But yeah, we'll see what happens. Again, interesting development. Obviously, you got the Bulldogs sort of bulking on Geelong, refusing their quite generous second round pick for Bailey Smith.
Yeah.
So there might be a few players that could actually go to the draft. Yeah, but I highly doubt we'll see it. I think the Bulldogs actually, like, they're pretty hot.
Yeah, they're
I'll
not
be amazed
really.
if they
They're
can.
not really wanting to play ball on Bailey Smith right now.
Yeah, like, I know a lot of the time it seems pomp and circumstance, but this actually seems like, man, they might not do it, but most of the times it ends up happening, so we'll see.
Well, the only other one that's kind of that caliber is Rioli, because
Yeah, I think the Suns will get the deal done.
so do I. I think it'll end up being a
Yeah,
goodwill deal at the end of the day. But I think that the
yeah,
Richmond just want to be, considering Richmond are losing, like a AAA valued player, and also trying to rebuild at the same time. Like that, they just want to be fairly compensated for losing that amount of talent.
yeah, exactly. I think that the Gold Coast will probably give up the most, and just looking at the AFL Reddit, there is like a theory that there might be a triple trade with Port, Pies, and Gold Coast, where Port might actually give a pick in order to able to take Rory Atkins as well.
I did
So they'll
actually
get
see that
Atkins.
earlier, so that's
Yeah.
entirely feasible.
So that might facilitate it. But as I said, it's more just, I think Gold Coast, without knowing that, without settling their own draft hand, just need to figure out how to actually get the move settled more than what we're seeing at the Bulldogs, where they're like literally putting a front up against Geelong, which will be interesting to see how that shapes up in the next couple of days.
Yeah,
that'll be probably the last trade I would, if I was to put money on the last trade, I reckon that could be it.
yeah, I agree. Like, it's considering like the pressure that's going to be on them as the clock ticks down. It's gonna be another down
Like,
to
if
the
it was
wire
goodwill, it
situation.
would have happened by now. Like, it should be one of the more straightforward trades. But yeah.
Oh well, we don't entirely get it, and we'll just let the teams do their thing, I guess.
Yeah. I'm definitely more analysis than list management, but it is always interesting to see how teams go along. And, as I said, it's always weird in the trade period. As I said before, technically draft picks are overrated. Like, your average draft pick isn't going to work out for even like a mediocre player that gets lost. But in the grand schemes of things, it's always a bit of, gambler's fallacy. What you could get is always a bit more alluring. And, as I said, in this draft, one of the last drafts before a compromised draft for the next few years. So teams will be wanting to get the best value they can, but obviously still wanting to be reasonable. And how reasonable they are, I don't know, but we'll see how that works out.
Yeah, agreed. So that will do us for this week. There will be an episode next week. We will talk about the rest of the trade period. Might theorize into the structure of the teams possibly going into the draft itself, as that's coming up. Probably an AFLW update as per normal. We shall see. Well, we haven't exactly talked about it yet, but there will definitely be an episode next week. I can guarantee that at least. So
Yep.
please go, obviously, check out our socials. Again, PAX just happened for me, so I am posting a couple of things here and there on my socials. Granted, I didn't actually take that many photos, so it's mostly just like storytelling on my Twitter, stuff like that. And yeah, thank you all so much. We will see you all next week for episode 34 of the Coast AFL Podcast. So until then, I hope you all have a great week, and we will see you next week. Catch ya.